Good morning.
Good morning. Chair Frazier, I believe we're ready to call the meeting to order.
That's outstanding. So I will call to order the SB 882 Advisory Council meeting this January 17th, 2025. Madam Parliamentarian, will you please do the roll call to establish a quorum?
Thank you. I will begin with calling Chair Frazier and then the Vice Chair. Chair Frazier,
Present.
Chair Frazier is present. Vice Chair Zuniga,
Present.
Vice Chair Zuniga is present. Member Brazil.
Present.
Member Brazil is present. Member Brown.
Present.
Member Brown is present. Member Burt.
Present.
Member Burt is present. Member Libero.
Present.
Member Libero is present. Member Pederudo. Member Pederudo. Member Pederudo is absent. Member Phillips.
Present.
Member Phillips is present. Member Tingarides.
Present.
Member Tingarides is present. Mr. Chairman, there are 9 members on the advisory council and the number required for a quorum is 5. The number present is 8. A quorum has been established.
Thank you for that, Madam Parliamentarian. So move on to some quick short remarks by myself. Again, I want to thank each and everyone on the council for their attendance and their hard work going forward for the betterment of interactions with law enforcement with the developmentally disabled and mental health community. One of the things also I want to add is our heart and thoughts and prayers with the people down in LA who are suffering through this whole crisis down there. And we just want to send our thoughts and prayers to you. And Deputy Chief, we know you're going through it. So thank you for all your service. So with that, going forward, looking forward to this really comprehensive agenda today that the Department of Justice staff has put together with all their hard work, and I can't thank them enough for this going forward. You always are spot on with our agenda, and looking forward to this going forward. So with that, we're going to go to item number 2, and Madam Parliamentarian, we're going to look for a roll call vote for the approval of the October 17th, 2024 meeting minutes, please.
Thank
First,
you.
may I have a motion?
Yes.
I'll
Members of
second
the
it.
council, you have received the minutes with the materials and have had an opportunity to review those materials. Are there any questions or comments or corrections regarding the minutes? Mr. Chairman, you can see you might ask for a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Council, may I have a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes, please?
Councilmember Libero, motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Second.
Councilmember Burt, will second.
Madam Parliamentarian, we have our motion.
Thank you. Excuse me. It has been properly moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. I will move forward to, well, first of all, is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, I will move forward with the roll to call the roll for the vote. I will begin with Chair Frazier.
Aye.
Chair Frazier votes aye. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Aye.
Vice Chair Zuniga votes aye. Member Brazil.
Abstain.
Member Brazil abstains. Member Burt.
Aye.
Member Burt votes aye. Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Brown votes aye. Member Libero.
Aye.
Member Libero votes aye. Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Phillips votes aye. Member Tingarides.
Aye.
Member Tingarides votes aye. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 members present and voting. There are 7 ayes, 0 nays, and 1 abstention.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. We'll move forward to agenda item 3.
Before moving forward, please announce that the minutes passed.
Okay, absolutely. With the vote, 7 aye, 1 abstention, no nays. The meeting minutes have been passed by the council. So moving on to agenda item number 3, the presentation and discussion item 4, presentation on crisis intervention team model and methods of training evaluation. And our panelist is Dr. Randy DuPont, University of Memphis School of Urban Affairs and Public Policy, and the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and also co-chair of the CIT International Board of Directors. Do we have Mr. DuPont ready to go in the queue?
I am here.
Welcome, Doctor. We're ready for your presentation.
I do appreciate it. I may be incorrect in this, but I think one of the DOJ staff wanted to introduce my presentation. If that's the case, please go ahead.
Yes, of course. Hello, this is good morning, Council. This is Ben Conway from California DOJ. We're welcoming today Dr. Randy DuPont from the University of Memphis. Dr. DuPont has decades of experience in this area. He's going to very briefly tell you about that. But one of the main focuses of his presentation this morning is going to be about recommendations about how to go about your charge of evaluating trainings throughout the state. And so he's going to talk about a training tool that we evaluated and circulated and will be presenting and discussing this afternoon. And he's going to talk about some of the concepts behind that to help you all. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Dr. DuPont, and thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ben. I do appreciate it. And I want to thank you all for inviting me to present. This is actually quite an honor. And part of what I want to talk about today is to focus very much on the task that the committee has, which is to evaluate police and law enforcement training in this area and in these 2 areas, and to be able to eventually make recommendations for change and continued progress in the area that we're talking about here. So I'm looking forward to that as well. I've been fortunate enough over the years to work with a number of statewide programs that were attempting reform in areas that involved intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health issues. And during that time, what I have found is that often they begin in efforts like what I'm seeing here, that it's advocates and those that have run programs getting together. They're encouraged and strengthened by things that happen in the legislature, such as what's happening with SB 882 in California. And then what it has been is basically the genesis for reform. And so I'm really quite excited about the fact that you all are really at the beginning of this and really could make, I think, quite a bit of difference. You've stepped forward as individuals. You're showing an enormous amount of civic pride, and I do think that that should be noted and highly appreciated because, again, I think that's what makes a difference throughout these programs, and that's what the police and law enforcement need from the citizens. That is the involvement that you're showing and the kind of things that might happen on a local level. So again, I'm quite honored and appreciative of having a chance to be part of this. Please note that I'm not going to focus a lot on the CIT programming because what we wanted to talk about was a more general approach to how to evaluate and look at individual training. And this will apply across the spectrum. And particularly when you look at statewide generated programs that are generated out of post, you're really going to find that basically they're not going to focus on one model or another of service delivery, but they will focus indeed on some of the commonalities that I think are important when it comes to doing a good job in being able to communicate to the police officers and the law enforcement officers involved on the critical elements of involvement with those individuals who are struggling with issues of intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health issues as well, and that kind of cooperation together really makes the difference in the end for whether the programs are successful or not. Another point that why I'm excited about being here is that I think at the present time, there's opportunities for positive change in this area that I will be honest, I didn't think would be possible in any of our lifetimes. We're really seeing a change in the public perception of the need for involvement and quality services in areas that involve both intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health issues. We're not only seeing that, but we're also seeing an understanding of those issues on the part of the police and the need to have the community involved. And I think this is a unique opportunity, one in which I think all parties are really looking forward to the kind of help that you all can bring and the things that I think can happen on the part of police departments to make a difference in individuals' life. I really do think that the key is community partnerships. And I think when you look at programming, I would encourage you to look and see, are there community partnerships that are reflected in this training and in this curriculum? That is basically, it's one thing to talk about community partnerships. It's another thing to make them a meaningful part of the training. And I again would encourage you to look for that. And you all are each experts in your own that area. I've looked at your backgrounds, and I know that you all bring a great deal of expertise in this area that you can then use to take a look and to make suggestions. Because indeed, I think it's important that that community partnership be meaningful, that it affects a lot of things. Obviously, the delivery of those services that the law enforcement is providing, but also in the police policy. And I think that those things should be reflected, and you should look for those as you develop to do this and see what goes on. I think also this time is great because there's opportunity for system integration. You begin to hear that word all over the place. And I don't think that needs to be a buzzword that just sounds good, but rather system integration really should mean that there's a meaningful cooperation between law enforcement, between the mental health system, between other behavioral health aspects of service delivery. And are they cooperating in a way that doesn't just say it, but really does walk that walk and really does follow through? And I think that that's a critical element for, again, for you to be looking at when you look at the kind of things that are developing in programming. I think that police training programs are a genuine starting point for positive outcomes in the end. That is that more than people realize, police officers and law enforcement officers in general really do count on their training, and it is meaningful. I think that sometimes you'll hear people suggest that that's really just a matter of routine or something. Not at all. It's a very positive thing that happens and moves along, and people really, I think, pay attention to the training, and it really is something that stays with them throughout their career. So it's not a minimal thing. It's not something that is just a box that has to be checked, but rather I think it's a very critical and important element. What I have found in my work, and I've been lucky enough to do a lot of work in officer wellness programs, and in those efforts that we've made, the officers talk about what's happened during critical events and why they've had good outcomes. And what they'll talk about is what they remember from their training and what that training impacted and how it impacted on them and their interaction with an individual and the judgment that they made, which I think is very important. And again, you'll be a critical element in looking at that. I would honestly tell you that good training can lead to good results, but unfortunately not so good training can lead to problems. And I'm really excited about the fact that you all will be able to make a difference and look at these kind of issues as you move forward and look at the trainings that you'll be asked to take a look at. Now, again, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I think it can't be stated enough, is that your work on this council will lead to improvements in police response to individuals with disabilities. It's important work, and you will make a difference. And I'm confident that with your backgrounds and with the power that you've been given, you'll be able to really help bring about reform. And I think that's a very critical element. Folks, I want to talk a little bit about some of the more specific things that I think would be helpful to you all to keep in mind as you use the instrument that the Department of Justice California is going to be providing for you. That instrument is basically a shorthand way of being able to bring your comments together. I'm not going to go into that too much because I know that they'll be presenting on that this afternoon in more detail. I think they have given you a copy of it, though, as part of the meeting preparation time. So I think that that would be something to take a quick look at as well. But I will give you something to kind of, I guess, that will tie into many of the things that I'm going to be saying as we move through. The key element that I want to bring to your mind is to talk a little bit about adult education strategies. Now, what people don't always understand is that police training really needs to take advantage of these kind of strategies. And that's the biggest change I've seen in police training in the 30 some odd years that I've been working with police and with other law enforcement agencies involved in training, is that there's an understanding that the learning process is not quite as it was before, and that it makes a difference in how it's approached. Now, please keep in mind that there are limitations to the adult educational strategies because some of the police training involves basic things that I would describe as physical skill training, that it really is repetitive by nature, and officers need to learn that as a response that they can make in a fairly instantaneous fashion. And so we're not really talking about that limitation necessarily, but what I want to focus is on the kind of training where I think that there can be very important things for adult training, adult education strategies to have something to say. And that I think that particularly with training in intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health conditions, that the training itself is very much a kind of training that lends itself to these kind of adult learning strategies. All right, I want to go through some of the basic findings in adult learning strategies that I think have application to what you're going to be doing and to police training, and I'd want you to look for those as they move through. That is that the difference, I think, between adult educational strategies and perhaps what was done before is that I maybe imagine many of you remember your high school and college days in which the professor got up there and basically talked at you quite a bit. Maybe nowadays they eventually moved to a PowerPoint and basically, but again, it was kind of passive learning. It was learning that where you were basically provided information, expected to memorize that information, and then pass it on a test. And I think those are good things in some areas. But really what has to happen, I think, is that we need to start with a basic assumption that the individuals that are in front of the instructor have a great deal of their own motivation, that they're not there because they're required to be there and they're just checking off another box, but they're there because of the fact that they really want to do what they're brought to do. One of the things I've always been impressed with the program I've been involved with, this Crisis Intervention Team training, is that we've had officers come up to us and say, what you've helped us do is recapture the idealism we brought to the profession. And I have found that to be true. Officers start with a great deal of idealism. They really want to help and they really want to make a difference. And does this training that you're going to be looking at capture that idealism? Does it respect the fact that officers are not there as a requirement and they're not just sitting in front of the instructor in a rote fashion, but they're there because they're motivated and they're excited about what's coming up and that they can capture that in this learning. It's important, I think, to keep in mind that officers tend to be visual learners. So are they learning visually or are they learning because they're listening and just hearing things? And that's sort of an important consideration. And somehow has that been captured in the training as it goes forth? I'll tell you, when I first started doing police training in the very beginning, I did notice something that was a bit disconcerting, and that officers were falling asleep in my class. But I was giving a lecture that was very much of a traditional lecture with all kinds of information. Later on, I did find out that a good number of them had worked the night shift, so I felt a little bit better. But basically, they were really trying to let me know that I needed to be something visual. And after riding enough with officers, I really did learn how much officers learn to rely on what they see. Now, it's important for them to develop skills in what they can hear, but they really also need to be very much aware of their visual learning and what goes on with the visual learning. But the question there becomes one, too, of, do they capture this in the training? Have they really tried to emphasize visual learning and not just learning because the professor is or the instructor is talking to them about things? So the adult learning really has to be engaging. you have to find it appealing, and the trainee has to become very, very excited about it. So adult learning values the fact that these officers and these young men and women and others that are among the group that is there, that they are bringing something to the training and that they have experience. Okay, that it really is captured by the training itself, that it says, we recognize that you have something to contribute, that what you've seen and have learned and your experience is important. And I think that's part of why I also am excited about this committee, because many of you bring a great deal of experience that you can make use of, and that really I see as basically being able to evaluate, is that respected in the training? Is that understood in the training? The task, I think, of a visual learning strategy, of adult learning strategy, is to really next show the officers how to do what it is they want to be done. So it's not just about learning different aspects and symptoms related to autism, for example. It's learning about, really to a large extent, it's actually getting to practice it or see it in practice. And so that kind of leads to the suggestion that for adult learning strategies for officers, it should be highly scenario based. That is, it's actual events that have been understood and that they've found a way to bring that into the classroom. That can be done in a number of ways. Some places are now using body-worn camera footage as a way of teaching, and sometimes that's effective. But they're also using scenarios in which they have very sophisticated role playing, and then they have evaluation and feedback given to the officers to show that they have not only learned the material, but they've digested it and can apply it, that they participate in the scenario. Some places have developed scenarios and they're important, but what they have found is that I have found sometimes, is that they don't then have the officers engage in it. So they have a different kind of learning process. So I think that's important. In the end, I think I would suggest strongly too, though, that you look and see if they're empowering the officers as a strategy to have leadership, to show initiative. I think it's fair to say that events that occur in the streets that are not easily scripted, they're not easy rules that make it one way work or another. An officer must be able to apply what they've learned, to be able to apply it on the spot, and to do it in a way that shows good judgment and leadership. And that, I think, is really not easy, and it sometimes can be a challenge. So I want to emphasize that with you as well. What I think is that additionally, there's a subtle factor that I think is hard to assess, but I want to encourage you to assess it. Does the instructional style follow the nature of the intervention that is being recommended as part of the curriculum and as part of the policy? And what do I mean by that? Basically, I think that there's a danger sometimes that officers can be trained in a way that's not always positive, that it doesn't always suggest that just as an intervention, one has to show a great deal of leadership, but also caring. Is that kind of message communicated through the training? And I think that's important. And I'll say a little bit more about that more as we move through and talk a little bit about this as well. Let me kind of be a little more practical. And I want you to keep in mind that there'll be an instrument that you'll be looking at later on today that will help you both remember some of these things, but also consolidate it for your evaluation information that you provide to the Department of Justice. Okay. What I want you to think about is to first start off, I do hope that you're able to get a hold of the policy and the curriculum in advance. The more that you can do that, the better off you'll be. And the policy should be consistent with that curriculum and then consistent with the class instructions. I think that's very important. So to start with, it would be important for you to look at the instructor's credentials. Do they have subject matter experts? Do they also have police officers? Do they have people with lived experience? Do they have family members? Are all those individuals represented in some of the trainings that you're seeing? It may not be in every training, but it will certainly need to be in some of the trainings when they're delivered as a program. That indeed, I think that different instructors bring different expertise. And when you have only one type of instructor, be that either the instructor that is a subject matter expert or a police officer that's part of the academy, I do think that it's important to have a mix of experts in the presentation And that would include obviously people with lived experience and family members as well. So is that all part of the curriculum that you're looking at and the training that you're looking at? So you can note that if you don't get that information in advance, when the introduction of the instructor. One of the things about my own work is that I've been fortunate enough to work both in a mental health emergency service and a service that also responded to individuals' needs that had intellectual and developmental disabilities. But I've also been able to work with the police for 30 or 40 years. So that's been a very helpful thing. I would encourage you to look for that in your instructors and see whether that's happening or not. Are the instructors given an opportunity to ride with the police so they can really understand the reality of what officers face? Or is it just something that is sounding good, but really doesn't reflect the reality of the situation? And that would be important to evaluate as you move through the instructional time that you're working with. Now, note that, again, I'm hoping that you'll get to see the policy and you'll be able to review it and also review the curriculum and determine if they're consistent, because I think that's critical. And I do think policy sets a tone for training, and therefore training there influences the actions on the street. I do like co-instructors across the spectrum of training. That is, that there's a group of individuals, as I've mentioned, that it's not one dimension, and that's really important because some courses may work best for just having police instructors or clinical professionals or individual lived experience, but you want to see that mix over time and make sure that you're happy with that kind of process and what's happening as you move through on that. Let's talk about the curriculum and talking about assessing adult learning strategies. As I've already hinted with the fact that I'm saying that the officers are very visual learners, are they using different types of modalities in developing their curriculum? Do they cross over and do a number of different things that would really be imaginative in allowing the learning process to take place? I have seen people use humor, and sometimes that's effective, but I've also seen them use videos that they have that are usually pretty well done, that are not just informational, but that can generate a high deal of interest. And I recommend you look at some of those. They're really outstanding. I think they're it's very important to integrate those into the various trainings that you see. And are the learning scenarios developed in a way that it reflects what the officers actually were doing on the street? And as much as possible, can some of those officers be part of the training and part of the feedback because they've been there and they understand that? Just as I think having feedback from individuals who are professionals and those with lived experience are also a pretty important part of that process. So have they made it easy for the person to be engaged? Can they follow the PowerPoint, or they have too much information on them? Those, I think, are critical elements of adult learning strategies that I think you as a observer will be able to make comments and involve yourself with and be able to help the Department of Justice know what's happening in the actual training itself. You're going to be the eyes and ears for the Department of Justice in California and being able to provide that information back again to them. Folks, what I would encourage you to do is to watch the audience of trainees as much as you watch the trainer. And what do I mean by that? You're going to know when you see if this is working. Did the trainees ask a lot of questions that showed that they had an interest in the material? Did the instructor show respect for those questions? And sometimes there's a tendency, because of the nature of authority in police departments and law enforcement, to occasionally talk down to the trainee. And so you look for that and see if they are encouraging questions and showing respect for meaningful questions, indeed. So is the class engaged? Or do you find that they're looking at their phone all the time and not really paying attention, or even worse, looking out the window or not always staying around the class? So take a look at that yourself and see what you think and what you've learned about that as you move through on these sort of issues. The instructor themselves, I think, deserves a great deal of your attention also. And what do you look for in a good instructor? Probably that they have a whole lot of energy and then dedication and knowledge of the subject. Do they show that? Is that reflected in the training? And can you find that and develop that as you move through? Do they convey respect for individuals with mental health and intellectual developmental disabilities? Now, that may seem pretty straightforward, but I have been at trainings where I felt that people didn't understand what respect meant. And instead, sometimes they were presented in a way that I found disrespectful and offensive. And if you find that, it's important to convey that information also, because you'll be able to determine that as you move through and what you see. Did the curriculum encourage the officers to make use of input from the individual who's in crisis, as well as the family and other members that are nearby? Sometimes officers have a tendency, unfortunately, to disregard the important things that a person's saying who's experiencing them because they're a person that's in crisis. And yet often that person has some of the knowledge that they need. Or to not talk to the family to understand information or people that are nearby and realize that they can help with the communication as well. Folks, I remember many instances that police have talked about with me where they were involved with individuals, particularly those with developmental disabilities, and sometimes they didn't understand the communication, but that their willingness to take the time and be patient led to the individual being able to articulate very important things. One case that I remember in which they were able to articulate that they were being abused. And one might not assume this because this was an adult who was fairly large, but this person was being abused. And the officers, I remember with great pride, brought that in as a scenario for us to use as a teaching scenario because they felt that it was so critical to listen through and understand the things that were being said, even though they were not always easy to understand in the front end. But with patience and understanding, they could develop that. So are you seeing that kind of encouragement occurred in the classroom when you're watching the training? Do the officers understand that and get that message? And I think that's, again, a critical element for what you're doing. Most importantly, when you're watching the training, are you interested or are you getting bored? And that's important. I think that if you're getting bored, it's meaningful information. What you experience is something that you should keep and not just discount, but basically use it as a way of judging the success or other aspects of the training indeed. Folks, I want to kind of bring it to a close with a couple of comments here. I think that police training and law enforcement training that's done well can be very emotionally moving. It can be very poignant in a way that is very, very not always easy for the subject, for the trainees to digest easily. And you need to be cognizant of that as well, that you might find that those reactions are also strong, that you find those reactions to what's going on. But if you do, if you find that to be strong, I think that's actually a good sign. That means that the training's having some impact and that basically you could try as much as possible to use that as part of your feedback, that I found that I was moved by the training, that it really did impact on me and made a big difference. And so I think that's really, really important as well. Folks, I want to stop at this point. I want you to keep in mind that we've got an instrument that's going to be presented to you and that will be, I think, an important instrument for you all to digest and to apply. But I would want to ask if there's some questions at this point. I know this is a bit of a tough format for questions, but again, if you have some questions, please feel free to ask, and we'll take a minute to see if you do. I'm not sure if there's a special way to signal it, but if not, I think we're in good shape. And I do see a question, Miss Burt. Excuse me if I'm from the South and I use those titles, but
I appreciate
Elizabeth,
it.
if you could respond, I appreciate your question. What you got?
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. DuPont. This is wonderful information. My question is regarding combining training on mental health and individuals with intellectual disabilities. We're starting to see a trend to kind of combine it, and I was just curious on your thoughts when you were talking about adult education. Is it similar information, or in your professional opinion, would you consider it two different trainings, or would you need a certain, like an 8-day training versus a 2-hour, or not 8-day, 8-hour training or 4-hour training versus a 2-hour training to try to separate the concepts?
Let me ask you, when you say combining, do you mean in the same time period, or do you mean that they might combine them over the course of a week? Which way are you?
No, same time period. So let's say it's a 2-hour class where we're trying to cover both populations.
Well, let's stop for a minute and separate the different types of training. If we're going to talk about scenario training, it might be a different. I'll get to that in a minute. But in terms of material initial training, I favor more of a separate approach. All right? I'm sorry. I'm trying to see if, oh, that's okay. Yeah, I would definitely, my inclination is to favor a separate approach. For one thing, I think there are different expertise, and therefore the same instructor is going to have a hard time mastering both areas well. I've worked with curriculum development with individuals who not only have lived experience, but those that are also experts in the subject matter, and they bring something different than the mental health experts bring. And so I wouldn't say that there's a combination at that level. So I would encourage there to be separate courses that if you're talking about, well, we've got 2 hours, well, then I would think that's going to be hard to do for either course, but you would try to say, let's have 2 separate courses of 2 hours. Now, when you move into scenarios, it becomes a different story, because I think in scenarios, the officers have to be prepared and they're not going to know what they're facing. And they're going to have to basically be ready to face whatever and quickly adapt. One of the things I've always respected about CIT officers is the way that they can change people call it changing roles, but they can relate to people in all kinds of different ways. And that I think that now I do think that in scenario training, the skills sometimes required to deal with some individuals who might have certain types of lived experience would be different than other types. And officers need to learn those separately so that they can then integrate them. So again, I think my answer would be in the beginning part, probably pretty separate. As it moves into scenario training, it makes sense for it to be brought together as long as they've got that basic foundation to call back on.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate your question. Anything else I could bring to you?
This is Cynthia. I'm the support person for Councilman Phillips. And
Thank you.
Councilman Phillips gave me permission to help share his thoughts. He was
Thank you.
very excited because your adult ed strategies are exactly what we do at the ARC San Francisco. Those are the kind of strategies we use in teaching people with intellectual and developmental disabilities also. And Councilman Phillips is a code instructor of the Black History class. And he was very excited because his participants are engaged in his class and they ask questions. And he looks for those same kinds of things in his classes that he teaches. So we were very excited to hear about that connection.
I have a question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll have a question for you too.
Go for it.
I'm gonna make sure that there's safety out there on the streets. Things happen out there when we do something about it. And when the police, like a good way, not a bad way, a good way. I want to make a difference.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I could tell you bring a lot of energy to this as well. So I think that's important. And you're right. I think, to be honest with you, good de-escalation, good intervention programs are safety programs. They're not incompatible. So I do think that makes a lot of sense. Now, by the way, I believe ARC is a national program. Am I correct? Yeah. And I wanted to let you know I have worked with ARC in other cities, and I would appreciate the work that you're doing, of course, as well as the Autism Society. So thank you all for your good work as well. And thank you for your comments. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I like you a lot.
Well, that's very kind of you. And I hope that continues to be true, as I'm hoping to continue to work with you all. I think that's in the store. Is there anything else I could answer as well? Well, folks, I do appreciate it. There'll be time for more questions and answers as you move through the day, and particularly, I think, as they present the instrument. I want to thank you for your attention. You've been very kind to me on that regard, and I'm looking forward to it. I think you have a great mission ahead of you, and I know that you'll all be able to make a big difference when it comes to reform and improving the way that that officers deal with individuals who are in crisis in these areas. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Doctor. That is very informative. We really appreciate you taking that time for us to give us that breakdown. So members, we are way ahead of our break time. I'm going to ask staff if we want to be able to, or can we fit in the next presentation before break, or should we just go ahead to break, or do you have a filler?
Councilmember Frazier,
Yes.
did Dr. DuPont say he had an instrument or a video or something he wanted to show now, or was that at a later time? Or
I believe that's at a later time.
okay,
I think it's, they can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's agenda item 14.
Yes, this is Ben Conway from DOJ. That's correct, Chair Frazier. The tool that Dr. DuPont was referring to is the tool that's attached to agenda item 14. And I believe it's called Assessment Tool. It's one of the 2 PDFs. There's also a short presentation.
Thank you.
And I believe I saw staff in the main room conferring on your question regarding the agenda, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll give them a couple seconds to figure out what's the next steps.
Chair, it looks like the next, it should be. It looks like the next presenter isn't available yet, but we may be able to move up agenda item 13, which is the report from the Committee on the Law Enforcement Agencies Survey, if Councilmember Libero feels comfortable moving that one up.
I can move that one up. It's only about 3 minutes worth of content, so we'll still end up with an excessive amount of time after.
Can you stretch it? You know what? I think we should move forward to the 13. I mean, there is a really excessive amount of time in between. So let's, if you don't mind, it would be fantastic for your participation.
Okay.
So we'll move forward to agenda item number 13, and we'll go forward with that. So please share with us your presentation.
Okay, this is our update on the committee on the Law Enforcement Agencies Survey. Since our last meeting of this council on October 18th, the survey committee met on December 11th to review the survey questions that would be going out to law enforcement agencies, as well as the strategic plan for messaging the survey and distributing the survey to the law enforcement agencies to try to receive the highest rate of responses that we could. Since that time, the survey was revised a bit to streamline the questions to make it more manageable and user-friendly for the agency staff that are going to complete it. After those changes were made, the survey was tested in the electronic survey platform, and the committee gave more feedback, and that was incorporated into more revisions on the survey. So at this time, the content of the survey has been finalized. So we have all of the questions and follow-up questions prepared. The survey has been put into the electronic survey platform and has been tested repeatedly. And at this point, the survey is just awaiting final approval from myself and Councilmember Burt. Once we've finally approved the survey, we'll be conducting outreach to the law enforcement agency heads so that they know the survey is coming, they can understand the context of it, with SB 882 and the purpose of our advisory council, and hopefully that will bring about some engagement with the survey once it launches. And we are on track to send out that communication and then the survey at the end of this month, which is January. Any questions from the council? Thank you.
One more time, any thoughts from the council on questions or comments?
I will just say, this is Vice Chair Zuniga. I will just say thank you both for your time and your commitment on working on that. I really appreciate your guys' efforts in that. Look forward to the results.
Thank you. And a big thank you to the DOJ staff and the research team who have been putting in a lot of time, making the revisions we've suggested, testing the questions, being really mindful of, potential burden on the law enforcement agencies. So a huge thank you to them as well.
Definitely. Most definitely. Thank you so much. So with that, we're at 9:49. We were going to be at break at 10:35. Has staff had any other thoughts on moving up an agenda item or filler to move that forward? Or should I suggest we break now until our reestablished quorum time at 10:45?
Chair, a suggestion, if we perhaps break now and reconvene at 10:15, reestablish quorum, we might be able to move 14 up to fill a little bit of that time at that point.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move forward to the agenda item break, and then come back at 10:15 and we'll reestablish a quorum at that time. So that's 25 minutes for a break. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hope your break was enjoyable. Looks like we have most of the folks here. Let's go ahead, Madam Parliamentarian, and reestablish a quorum, please.
Thank you. Chair Frazier is present.
Present.
Vice Chair Zuniga.
Present.
Vice Chair Zuniga is present. Member Brazil.
Present.
Member Brazil is present. Member Brown.
Present.
Member Brown is present. Member Burt.
Present.
Member Burt is present. A member Libero.
Present.
Member Libero is present. Member Petarudu. Member Petarudu is absent. Member Phillips.
Present.
Member Phillips is present. Member Tingarides.
Present.
Member Tingarides is present. Mr. Chairman, there are 9 members on the advisory council. The number necessary for a quorum is 5. The number present is 8. A quorum has been reestablished.
Thank you for that. So we have established a quorum on our return from our break. So we'll move on to item number 6, which is a presentation discussion item again. It's a presentation of the joint project of RAND and the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, on law enforcement response to persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our panelists are Dustin Richardson and Megan, I hope I'm saying, Cahill, with PERF.
I believe Chair Frazier, and I apologize, I didn't want to interrupt you, that they will be ready at the scheduled time, but if it is the council's pleasure, we could advance item 14, which is DOJ's presentation, and begin that right now to fill this time until they're on.
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
And so the parliamentarian can correct me, but I believe you need a motion to move item 14 to now.
No, you have the freedom to move things on the agenda.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
So let's move to item number 14. And would you like to give it the introduction, Ben?
Yes, actually, I'll be making this presentation. Hello again. My name is Ben Conway, he, him, from the California Department of Justice. I'm a Deputy Attorney General. Trini and Colleen, if you're able to, would you put up our slides for this present? Oh, perfect. Thank you. So to call back to the last council meeting, I know it's been a while, but we talked about creating an evaluation tool to help you all as you do either in-person or remote evaluations of trainings, looking at these trainings and reviewing your impressions. You granted us the authority to draft a tool to come back and present to you, and that's what I'm here to do today. The tool I'm going to be talking about is attached as item number, it's one of the two documents as item number 14 on your agenda. One of them is the PowerPoint that we're going to be walking through, and the other is this 3-page tool. We worked together with Dr. DuPont, who you just talked about, to develop this tool. And at the end, we'll be asking you to consider 2 motions. I just want to preview them now so that you're aware of what we'll be recommending that you do, but also what your options are, because you do have many options if you're not satisfied with the tool as it is. So the first thing we'll be recommending is that you finalize the evaluation tool, whether that's today or with further instructions for edits from you. And second is to delegate to DOJ the authority to develop and facilitate a training attendance plan to facilitate your attendance and review of trainings. Oops. And Trini, I apologize. Is it forward to do the slide? Oh, there we go. Okay. All forward. Okay. The one thing I want to flag before I get into talking about the tool itself are the timing considerations. I know it may feel like, we have until the end of next April, but really that is right around the corner when we look at the time it's going to take to evaluate trainings throughout the state, research the report, and then draft the report to the legislature. April 2026, and of course, you'll want to have time to consider it, to consider drafts and edits. So we want to start evaluations as soon as possible to ensure that the council has adequate time to do this important evaluation work that will be part of the foundation of their recommendations. So an overview of the evaluation tool. The evaluation tool has 4 sections: evaluator data, instructor and training background, substantive overview of the training, and course evaluation. And I'm going to talk through each of these sections in turn. Evaluator data, this is the background information on the training itself, including your name, the name of the course, the date, the type of the training. This will help us track who attended what trainings, and it's just 4 quick questions that you should be able to answer in advance of the training. And I apologize, I skipped ahead. I skipped in my own notes of the overview. In its current form, to backtrack a moment here, the tool combines open-ended questions, like where you just have a text box to respond, and multiple choice questions. It'll hopefully take 15 minutes or less to complete per training. And ideally, we'll upload this into some sort of digital forms program so that you can access it from any device with an internet program, and then it will automatically be your responses will be automatically be transmitted to DOJ. And hopefully you can have the tool a printed copy of the tool during the training for your reference, and to fill it out as you're going while things are fresh in your mind. So jumping back into the tool itself, I apologize for skipping around here. That was the evaluator data, was a very quick introductory section. The next section is on the instructor and training background. And this section is the background on the training and the instructor if it's available. Sometimes you may not know, for example, the educational level of an instructor, and that's okay. Collect the best data you can, and we'll use what we get. Or we'll recommend that you use what you get. But these questions will help you quantify what you're seeing in the trainings. For example, X% of them were 4 hours long, or Y% of them were presented by current or former law enforcement officers. Now, an important thing that I want to talk about, because you may see that we're not actually asking anywhere who is doing the training, what agency. And this is to increase the likelihood of participation. We're urging the council to use arbitrary numbers. So that means a random number that will track the training, but not identify it. And the reason for this is that we're going to be asking trainers to voluntarily let us into their programs. And we want to minimize their perceived risk that the council is going to go in and be making public criticisms of their trainings by name. We want to be able to balance your duty to go in and evaluate trainings honestly with probably their interest in protecting their trainings and reputation. The third section of the training tool is the substantive overview of the training. This is the lengthiest section of the tool, and it includes questions, for example, on the goals of the training, who developed the training, including whether it included stakeholder input. And again, this is if that can be determined. That may arise during the training or it may not. Whether the perspectives of various impacted individuals were presented and how. And I want to highlight here that when we talk about impacted individuals, we of course think about people with developmental disability and intellectual disabilities and mental health conditions, but also our first responders and law enforcement officers are impacted individuals in these interactions. And what training techniques were used, for example, and there are prompts on various training techniques. While this is still reporting, the next section gets to your impressions. It will provide your fellow council members valuable information about the types of retrainings you respectively saw. You know, no one of you is going to be able to go out and see all of the hundreds of trainings throughout the state of California. So this will help you be able to communicate with one another what you're seeing out there. The final section, even though it looks short, the course evaluation is really the meat of the tool. And this is your impressions of the training. As Dr. DuPont said this morning, you know, if you're feeling bored during a training, or if you're feeling really engaged during a training, that's important information to communicate to the council. If you're feeling that, then there's a good chance that other audience members are. And if you're live in a room, you can look around and often visually confirm that if you're a sighted person. So this section, it has 2 multiple choice prompts and 4 open questions and gets directly to the council's question, the council's charge. Was in from what was presented well, what could be further developed, whether the trainers measure the effectiveness of the training. And then there's a final prompt, of course, a catch-all. Do you have any other observations? Is there anything we missed? As you can see, we kept this to just about 3 pages. We wanted to keep this as usable and user-friendly as possible, but we wanted to have that last prompt there because in its brevity, in its shortness, we might be missing things. So I want to stop here and see if that council has any questions right now about the training tool. And I'll circle back after I talk about the proposed training plan too, but I want to take this moment first. Okay. I'm not hearing any, and of course there will be another opportunity. Oh, wrong button here. Sorry. So what's next? The options that you have are either to approve this tool as it is, or delegate to DOJ the authority to work with the council subject to further feedback from you all. We're urging that because given the timing, we strongly recommend that the council act quickly on this and not wait until the next meeting that will likely be in early April. And I apologize, there's some emergency sirens in my background, so if that's coming through, well, pardon. If you delegate to DOJ this authority, what we'll do is we'll identify and arrange trainings for each of you to attend, subject to approval of the chair and vice chair. And when we do this, we're going to be mindful of where you all are. We're not going to send somebody in San Diego up to Humboldt County, for example. We're going to look for things that are geographically reasonable to you and or online. And we're going to hopefully find a mix of both online and in-person trainings, because that is, at least from what our initial canvassing shows, what is available to law enforcement officers is this mix of different modalities. You all would then attend and evaluate these training programs, provide the completed forms to DOJ to analyze and compile, and then you would discuss them at future council meetings. So I'll pause again and see if there are any questions now that I've talked about the next steps and you've had a minute to digest my discussion of the tool. Yes, Councilmember Brazil, I see your hand up. And Councilmember Burt, I see you next.
Thank you. Have we been coordinating this with Post for the site visits, the evaluations, and referencing some of the evaluation tools they have to cross-pollinate the evaluation process?
Let's see, and I think that's a two-part question. So in terms of their evaluation tools, we have not gotten anything back from them about evaluation tools that they use for this work. In terms of actually coordinating with them, they were incredibly helpful in providing us their list that we discussed at the last council meeting of all the trainings. And then we've been holding off on further communication with agencies because we want to ensure that we have the authority from the council to do so.
Perfect.
Does that answer your questions, council member?
Yeah, just one quick follow-up. If we made a request to Post and they haven't responded back, or are we just waiting at our end to make those requests? I just want to make sure that they're being responsive to your needs because of the tight timelines.
Yes, I think Post has been very responsive to us. My impression was that they didn't have anything to share that was relevant to the council's work at this time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Burt, I had seen your hand up next.
Thank you. Two questions, and to piggyback on what Councilmember Brazil had asked is, are we prefacing this so that we're coming in that this is a collaborative effort and that we're not there to judge people, or just to set the stage, so to speak, is the first question.
Okay. Yes, excellent question, and thank you. We will absolutely be doing this. Part of the plan would be outreach to, if we're authorized to, would be outreach to, for example, chiefs associations and using DOJ's own internal resources to reach out and let them know, here's the purpose of this, similar to the survey of, this is not trying to be a gotcha moment. We're really trying, the council is really trying to determine how best to make recommendations to the legislature of how to improve these interactions moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question was, are we focusing only on sworn? I know we had talked about 911 operators at one point, and I didn't necessarily see that on what Post had given us, but is this specifically targeted to sworn officers? Thanks.
Yes. So some of the Post materials did appear to address, when you look at, I believe it was called target audience. I think that was what the column was called. It did appear to address not first responders, but rather 911 operators. But if we're able to find, we will certainly look for those trainings. I'm not certain yet what we can get people into. But we will certainly look for those types of trainings to ensure that you're seeing both operators and sworn officers.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Brazil, did that answer all your questions?
No, one more observation based on that.
Yes.
Which you may, if you work with Post, there are some self-paced trainings, particularly for dispatchers, that we may want to evaluate. They're scenario based and they make decisions, and if the wrong decision's made, then it goes down a bad path. So we might want to evaluate some of these self-paced individual lessons that might even be easier to do through Post.
Oh, great.
In the class.
Thank you, Councilmember. And if other folks have questions, I'm glad to answer them without it, but if you hover down at the bottom of your screen for the council members, there's a raise hand function right near the middle of the screen. And that's how council members Burt and Brazil were able to put that yellow hand up, and it enables me to quickly see that you have a question. Give it another moment here. because this has been a lot of information to process this morning. Okay. Well, with that, I'll conclude with our recommendations, and of course, I'll stay on camera and I'll be online all day, but ready to answer anything if it comes up during the next discussion. But we're recommending that the council make the following 2 motions. So the first is to adopt the evaluation tool for use. And what that would mean is that we would operationalize it by putting it into some sort of, hopefully putting it into some sort of form software that enables you to just input it and it transmits it to us. And I'm waving my magic Harry Potter hands because I don't understand how the technology behind it works, but I hope that it does. But otherwise, but sorry, and I hope I appreciate, I see a few people smiling at my dad jokes. I don't mean to be glib here about this serious material, but I also want to be a little lighthearted on a Friday morning. The second motion we'll be asking for is to delegate to DOJ the authority to create and facilitate a training attendance plan for the council, subject to the final approval of the chair and vice chair. And I know that was a mouthful, so I'm glad to repeat it. If any council member raises your hand, I see. Okay, thank you. So that's delegate to DOJ the authority to create and facilitate a training attendance plan for the council, subject to the final approval of the chair and vice chair. And I'll explain it, and then hopefully it'll make more sense. And if not, I'll be glad to repeat it again or answer questions about it. What that means is we're asking for the authority to, I described a process of for example, reaching out to potential trainers, getting permission to attend the training, registering you for the trainings, identifying who's going to go where. Sorry, Councilmember Burt, you're right in front of me. So, Councilmember Burt is going to go to A training, Councilmember Brazil is going to go to B training, and then coordinating with you to the extent you have questions. So that is what we mean by create and facilitate, is we would not be doing the evaluating. You would be doing the evaluating, but we would be doing all of the steps to operationalize that. I know that's kind of a buzzword, but to make it happen. So does that second motion, so I want to first pause for understanding, because I know that's a mouthful both ways I described it. Do folks have questions, especially about either motion, but especially the second one that we're recommending?
Mr. Chairman, this is the parliamentarian. I would recommend that you handle the motion separately. To first address the first one, asking the council members if they have heard the report in the discussion in the recommendation that the council adopt the law enforcement evaluation tool as presented. Asking for that motion and the second, and then we can have the discussion with respect to that motion and move forward through the vote and then go to the second recommendation.
Thank you with that. Absolutely. So what I'll ask is that is there any discussion or comments that would like to be brought forth on the first motion by the council?
You need to have a motion first. Ask for a motion.
May I have a motion for the first
Recommendation.
recommendation as described?
This
Please.
is Vice Chair Zuniga. I'll move that we adopt the evaluation tool that DOJ has presented.
Second.
We have a first.
Second,
Mr. Phillips is second.
yes.
Any discussion or comments regarding the motion item? Hearing none. Madam Parliamentarian, would you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, thank you. The motion before you, excuse me, it has been moved and properly seconded that the council adopt the law enforcement evaluation tool as presented. I will start with the Chair Fraser.
Aye.
Chair Fraser votes aye. Vice Chair Zuniga,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zuniga votes aye. Member Brazil?
Aye.
Member Brazil votes aye. Member Brown?
Aye.
Member Brown votes aye. Member Burt?
Aye.
Member Burt votes aye. Member Libero?
Aye.
Member Libero votes aye. Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Phillips votes aye. Member Tingarides?
Aye.
Member Tingarides votes aye. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, there are 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to
The motion passes.
motion passed as described. We'll move on to the second item. Would you please, for reference, Madam Parliamentarian, read the second motion again for the council?
I will have Dag Conway repeat the recommendation with respect to the training attendance plan.
Yes.
Ben?
The recommended motion is delegate to DOJ the authority to create and facilitate a training attendance plan for the council, subject to the final approval of the chair and vice chair.
So do I have a motion?
Vice Chair Zuniga here, I'll motion to approve.
Second, please.
Chair Tingarides, I second.
Thank you so much for that. We have a first and a second. Any discussion on the item from the council or concerns?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, please.
Would the DOJ be selecting which trainings we are going to, and would we be able to make recommendations?
Great question. Mr. Conway?
That's a great question. We welcome all of your input on that. And it depends on your guidance. So this would be a great time to give us that guidance, or as you're moving forward to let us know, I think we should attend Y training, email it directly to staff so as to avoid serial communication under Bagley-Keene. But yes, if there are particular trainings that you're aware of, we would welcome that input as we're researching trainings to put together for you all.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Because there's a wider range of hours, there's the self-paced training, there's 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, and 1 week trainings. Will we be sampling a little bit of each per member, or will it depend on availability?
I think the plan is a little bit of both. The ideal would be to sample a full kind of bell curve of the ranges of time for the trainings. But for example, I know LAPD's MEU training, I believe, is a full week, 40-hour training, and that might be too much of a lift for our council members. So we'll, of course, work with you all on what's realistic for you to attend.
Thank you.
Fantastic question. And I would like any of the council members who do have concerns or time constraints to be able to address that with DOJ staff so that you can, they can actually formulate something that works within your realm also. Because again, we are volunteers. Any other thoughts or questions? And if there are any follow-ups, please contact staff on the issue. But we do have, I see none at this point. We do have a first and a second on the motion. So Madam Parliamentarian, would you please take the roll call on this?
Yes, thank you. I will begin with Chair Frazier.
Aye.
Chair Frazier votes aye. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Aye.
Vice Chair Zuniga votes aye. Member Brazil.
Aye.
Member Brazil votes aye. Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Brown votes aye. Member Burt.
Aye.
Member Burt votes aye. Member Libero,
Aye.
Member Libero votes aye. Member Phillips,
Aye.
Member Phillips votes aye. Member Tingarides,
Aye.
Member Tingarides votes aye. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and no nays.
Thank you for that. Motion passes unanimously on the vote. And so we're getting to our number 6 agenda item. Or are we okay to move forward with the individuals in the queue? So I'm going to represent, I'm assuming they're ready to go. Do we know?
Yes, I think the PERF team is next. I think we are ready to go.
Okay.
If that's who you're asking, I didn't know if you were asking someone else who was running the committee.
No, just looking forward.
Oh, I apologize, Chair. It looks like they may have been having mic issues in the main office, the public location.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So we'll move forward to agenda item 6, the presentation and discussion item of the presentation of the joint project of RAND and the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, on law enforcement response to persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our panelists, Dustin Richardson and Megan Cahill from PERF. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us and lending us your expertise.
Yes, Jim, and thank you all for having us. We are grateful for the opportunity to come and talk to you all about the recent report that we just published in collaboration with the RAND Corporation. And let me make sure. So we're excited to come in and talk to you all about that report today. Just to give you an overview, what we did is brought together a panel of about 24 experts in law enforcement, with advocacy organizations and research, to ask them sort of to identify what are the key problems in this area and what needs done to correct those problems. But before we get into that, I'll just take a moment to briefly introduce myself and allow my colleagues an opportunity to do the same. I am Dustin Richardson, a senior research associate at PERF. And a few years ago, I earned my doctorate degree in criminology at the University of South Florida under Dr. Lori Brudell. And since then, I've been in my role at PERF conducting research on the critical issues in policing. So, of course, the response to individuals with IDDs, but also use of force, the use of body-worn cameras in training, anything that you would consider a critical issue in policing, we're happy to take a look at. But I don't want to talk too much about myself, so I will pass it over to Megan, who is the Director of Research at PERF.
Hi, everyone, and thank you also, like Dustin said, for having us. We're happy to share what we found in our research. So my name is Megan Cahill. I am the Director of Research here at PERF, and I've been here for almost exactly 3 years now. And prior to that, I was actually at the RAND Corporation, which was our partner for this project. So it's a small world, and we just bounce around from different organizations to do this research. But again, like Dustin said, at PERF, we do a huge range of research on a number of different topics, all related to critical issues in policing. And then Dustin, we have one more colleague on. Are we going to have Kevin introduce himself?
Yeah, Kevin, you can go ahead and say a word.
Hi, my name is Kevin Lucy. I'm a senior research assistant with PERF. I've been with PERF just under 3 years now, working on workshops such as this and various other research projects. I'm excited to be here to see my colleagues present our work today and to see the interest that the California DOJ have in this important area.
And so that's the team, or most of it. We also had Jeremy Barnum, Deputy Director of Research at PERF, and a few folks at RAND, like Megan mentioned, host this workshop and produce the report. But why did we produce this report? What was the basis for it? And excuse me. like I think most people on this call, we believe, let me figure out how to work this slideshow. We believe that the law enforcement response to those with IDDs can be improved. And we believe that law enforcement professionals wish to do better in this area. However, very little is known about the issue. There are a number of research gaps, training gaps, resource gaps. We just don't know a ton, which can be challenging to improve the issue. One thing that we do know is that police officers are the gatekeepers to criminal justice system. And like all other populations, those with IDDs are going to most often encounter police officers first. Unfortunately, like I noted, little is known about their involvement with police officers. And as a result, there's been little guidance for law enforcement. There's little training, few resources, which of course can lead to poor outcomes. So what's the answer? Well, the easy answer is to develop this guidance, but how? And that was the purpose of our workshop, to identify how we can improve on this issue. So ultimately, what the expert panel did, and Megan will talk about this in a bit more detail momentarily, but they identified the high priority needs related to improving the police response. Now, when we say needs, what we're referring to is key problem areas or areas for opportunity, along with potential solutions for those. And I'll give you one example. The panel identified the lack of data as a problem. We can't answer basic questions about a lot of things. So one potential solution is to identify existing data sources, see what they tell us, and see what else we need to collect. But before we dive into all that, I will pass it back over to Megan, who will give you a little bit more information about who we are at PERF, what we do, and then the larger project that this workshop was a part of.
Dustin. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about what PERF is and what we do. So we are, at our heart, we are a membership organization for police executives. And to us, the police executive criteria is that members have to have a bachelor's degree and you have to be at the rank of a lieutenant or higher. So our members do tend to come from larger agencies and they tend to come from agencies that skew a bit more progressive than your average cop, because they're coming from larger cities and they also have a bachelor's degree. And then they also tend to have more experience than the average cop because they're all executives, they're all at the lieutenant level or higher. So we do a lot of direct work and technical assistance for police agencies across the country. We do things like reviews of use of force, staffing and internal process reviews. We do consulting on different policing strategies that agencies might be considering. And then also one of our main accomplishments or main things that services that we provide now is that we created and provide a de-escalation training program. It's called ICAT, and it stands for Integrating Communications Assessment and Tactics. It was rigorously evaluated and it was found to be effective in reducing officers' use of force. And we offer that training free. We have a facility that was built just for the ICAT training, and agencies can send their officers there for free. So it is available to any agency that wants it. And then also PERF has a smaller research division, which is where I work, and my colleagues Dustin and Kevin and Jeremy, who's the deputy director. So I'm the director of research. Our group focuses mainly on long-term grant-funded research. We get most of our funding from federal sources, but we do also work with foundations, and we cover a range of topics related to policing and critical issues in policing. And that's where our work on IDD stems from, the Priority Criminal Justice Needs Initiative that we work on with RAND. So this project is funded by the National Institute of Justice. That's the research arm of the federal DOJ. And NIJ gives out millions of dollars in research funding every year. And our project, the Priority Needs Initiative, was really designed, it's been around for over a decade, and it was designed to inform NIJ's priority areas for funding each year. So what topics did they want to give out research funding for? So the project was really designed to identify and assess the highest priority problems or significant opportunities facing law enforcement, courts, and corrections agencies. So it spanned the whole criminal justice system. And then the idea was that you could identify, or these workshops could identify potential needs or solutions for addressing those problems. So the RAND Corporation partnered with PERF to conduct all of the workshops on law enforcement topics. They partnered with other agencies. It's on the screen, the University of Denver for corrections and RTI for courts issues. And so typically PERF, RAND, and NIJ at the beginning of a year would brainstorm topics that we thought were emerging issues for law enforcement that were really lacking research evidence. And then we would plan workshops around a handful of those selected topics. So the IDD workshop was identified as a really key area that was lacking research and was lacking attention and really needed to have more of a light shined on it. And so the workshop developed in several stages, which was pretty typical for a workshop. So first we conducted interviews with experts in the topic, and those experts were typically the same people that we invited to come to an in-person workshop as participants. So for the IDD workshop, we had about 20 experts, and they represented law enforcement, which also included 911 communications. Also, we had IDD advocates, academic researchers, social service practitioners were represented, other officers who work directly in law enforcement and in some agencies had specific units that handled individual response to individuals with IDD. So there was a range of perspectives and a range of expertise on the topic. So the interviews gave us initial insight, helped us plan the conversation that we would have during the workshop. And then we convened a day-and-a-half workshop in DC for the participants to talk about the main issues, the main problems related to our topic area. And so we also asked participants to focus on things that they thought would be problems within the next 5 years. So it was kind of a medium-term time horizon. And the idea was on the first day, participants come up with an extensive list of problems related to the topic area. And once they had come up with a pretty exhaustive list and no one had any more kind of problems that they thought really should be represented on this list, we then had participants rank the problems in terms of their importance for being addressed. So how important is it that any of these given issues are addressed? And then the next step was going in order of the most important problem was to discuss and identify what would be needed to address the problem. So the needs or these kind of solutions to addressing the problem could come from government agencies, they could be from the private sector or from law enforcement, it could be training, it could be research, it could be any number of things that would help address this problem. But because these were new or emerging problems, often the biggest challenge, and this was true for the IDD workshop, but also true for a lot of our other workshops, the biggest challenge is really a lack of information. So a lot of times, the solutions that were identified involve conducting various types of research. So it kind of is a joke in the workshop because every problem you identify, it's like, well, we don't really have that much information on that topic. So we really need some more research on that topic. We really need better data on that topic. And so those are the kinds of things that would come up time and again in the workshop. So we then did another ranking exercise on the needs that were identified, and the needs were ranked on their likely payoff. So how big would the payoff be if that problem or that need was actually undertaken? Would it give you a big payoff or would it be small? And then how likely is it that that need could actually be conducted or that the need could actually be addressed? So we kind of gave some guidance for the ranking. So how easy would it be to actually address the need, and then what would the payoff be? So then at the end of the workshop, we end with this list of prioritized problems and needs and we would share that with NIJ, and NIJ would use it to inform their funding decisions, research decisions, and we also share it publicly, as you know, since you guys found the report on the RAND website, to inform other work being done on the topic. And we really hoped that our work would inform the conversation moving forward about where researchers, practitioners should really be focusing their efforts to have the biggest impact on the topic, to make the biggest improvements on the topic. So that sort of is the story of the workshop and how we got to where we are now. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dustin to talk about the findings and the stuff that you guys are probably really most interested in.
So as Megan said, there were a prioritized list of needs that were identified by the panel. And as you can see here, if you count it up, I believe it's 23. There were 23 total needs to be that ought to be addressed to improve the police response. And you can see needs were classified as low, medium, or high priority. And these are sort of the three main themes or problem areas that came up. So the one that you can see as the most attention or the most associated needs was understanding law enforcement's involvement with the IDD population. And then also the panel found it important to improve training and resources and to establish partnerships. And so I'll get, for the remainder of this presentation, I will get into what some of those needs were. Of course, it'll be an overview of those. We won't get into the granular details of each of the 23 needs. But you can see, as we see here, that understanding law enforcement's involvement with this population was the most prevalently discussed need. And that's because we can't even answer some of the foundational questions related to this issue. In fact, the panel identified the inability to answer these basic questions as the most significant barrier to improving the law enforcement response. And that's because the current data landscape is inadequate for answering those questions. Outside of a few studies, we really don't know how involved the police and IDD population are. We don't know how often those with IDDs come into contact with the police, why they come into contact, why they're arrested. Similarly, we know very little about law enforcement agencies' approaches to this community. We don't know how they train, how they respond, what's working, what are the challenges they're facing. There are, of course, a few agencies throughout the nation that you could identify as tracking this information or doing a good job. But by and large, we can't answer these fundamental questions. So the panel identified a number of ways, potential solutions for addressing this issue. And those sort of fit within three themes, or rather three steps, sort of. The first being taking inventory of the data that exists. So I touched on this a bit earlier, in that we can't answer these questions. So we need to identify what data is out there, whether it's collected by law enforcement agencies, other criminal justice or government organizations, researchers, to identify not only what's out there, but what's missing. What else do we need to know? And though this data represents a good start, much of it is flawed. It either relies too heavily on self-report, or sometimes it's disproportionately focused on autism. So we don't have a clear picture of the issue at hand. So first is identifying what data we have, and then next would be going out and gathering the data that we need. And that begins with developing rigorous data collection standards. These standards should outline what information needs to be collected, who should collect this information, how it should be protected and accessed. And though the panel did not identify a comprehensive list of data points or variables to collect, they did identify a few that are important to know, such as the number of calls or IDD related calls an agency responds to in a given year, the number of wandering incidents or drownings that they respond to, excuse me, and also the prevalence of these disorders and co-occurring disorders in the community, which of course would require coordination with the medical community and or a local public health department. Importantly, these experts would like to see these standards set at a state level, at a minimum, in that there's uniformity, of course, across data collection, but also just to ensure that all agencies are collecting this data, and it can be helpful at understanding the problem sort of at large, or rather, the issue at large. And then once we have collected this data, or as we're collecting it rather, it's important to begin evaluating the impact of certain IDD specific training, strategies, resources, to identify the promising practices that's going to help improve the law enforcement response. And again, the panel did not identify an exhaustive list of these topics, but they did note that it is critically important to evaluate law enforcement training, as well as things like family maintained registries, community outreach and education efforts, individual justice plans and diversion centers, and really anything that is going to be used to improve the response. Of course, before these resources can be evaluated, they must be developed, which brings us to the second sort of major problem area, which is that the police lack guidance. I noted that not being able to answer the basic questions was identified as the most significant barrier to improvement. Well, the panel identified developing IDD-specific training for law enforcement as the most critical need, as the potential solution that is going to be most impactful. And that's because, as we already touched on, police are the gatekeepers to the criminal justice system. So it is problematic when they lack the training and resources necessary to respond. And in absence of that, officers are going to be uncertain of appropriate responses, which is only going to be exacerbated by the varied nature of IDDs. And the common refrain by some of the law enforcement panelists, as well as some of those with lived experience, is that if you've met one person with an IDD, then you've met one person with an IDD. And they were underscoring, again, the varied nature of these disabilities. It's not going to be as simple for an officer to identify an IDD as it would, say, a drug overdose, where the victim is going to have blue lips, pale skin, and potentially be non-responsive. So in the absence of this guidance, officers are going to be forced to rely on traditional approaches, which are not going to account for the unique needs of those with IDDs. This can lead to officers misidentifying disabilities or missing them altogether, making inaccurate assumptions about competency or credibility. It can risk things like false confession, inappropriate placement in institutions, all things that we don't want to happen. And so the panel identified a number of ways that the field can improve on training and resources. And that first step is going to be identify the key training topics. And as I've noted previously, they didn't come up with an exhaustive list here. I think these lists could have required a separate workshop in and of themselves. But what the panel did do was identify two topics that are critical to communicate to officers. The first is how to identify when somebody might have an IDD. And the second is how to communicate with that individual. As I'm sure most of us know, these individuals can respond atypically, especially to law enforcement presence. So they may have a delayed reaction to an officer's command or question, or they may flee. And it's important that officers understand that this isn't non-compliance. This may just be how this individual communicates or how they handle stress. So it's important for officers to understand this. One of the advocacy organizations at the panel trains officers, and one of the exercises that they often use is a role-playing scenario in which the officer is asked to mimic an IDD. So they're instructed to wait, say, 15 seconds before responding. They are prohibited from using words that contain the letter A. And understandably, for these officers, it can make communication difficult, and that allows them the opportunity to empathize with those who live with these disabilities. So once the key topics have been identified, we can then work on establishing training standards and curricula that address training content, the mode of delivery, whether it's lecture-based or scenario-based, how long this training should be, and importantly, evaluation criteria. As I've said a number of times, little is known about this issue. So what training is to be developed is going to have to be developed in absence of a significant evidence base. So developing this training is going to need to be an iterative process where we implement what we think is best, evaluate that, and improve from there. At the panel also, there were two important points of discussion surrounding training criteria, training standards during the workshop. One was that while these standards should be developed probably at the state level to, again, ensure uniformity across jurisdictions, it's important to tailor training to the local community. So, for example, drowning prevention is going to be far more relevant for coastal agencies than it is going to be for inland agencies. Similarly, traffic encounters and the relevant training there is going to be more important for traffic enforcement officers than, say, investigators. The other point, which had less agreement, was on when to deliver this training, more specifically whether you deliver it alongside the mental health crisis training that law enforcement often receives. Certainly, there's overlap between crises related to mental health and IDDs, but there are also important distinctions. And some of the panel worried that by combining these two types of trainings, or these two training topics rather, that the IDD training can be overshadowed and that officers may not take away what they need to be successful in the field. Others, however, acknowledge that law enforcement is asked to train on a lot, and the list of training topics is ever growing. So they feel that it is more important to ensure that the two are delivered, or rather that the training is delivered, even if that means it's alongside a mental health crisis training. Ultimately, that's a distinction that each state, jurisdiction, what have you, has to decide. But the panel was in agreement that above all else, it's just important that officers receive this training in some capacity. Now, beyond training, the panel would like to see resources developed and improved. I'm talking screening instruments, family registries, special insignia, such as a badge or a patch that officers can wear to indicate their understanding of IDDs, or treatment facilities. And of those, screening instruments were of great importance, because ultimately where they think the most improvement can come from is awareness of these disabilities, is understanding how to communicate with them. So if officers have these screening instruments, or more importantly, dispatch has these screening instruments, then agencies can more readily identify calls that may be related to an IDD. Registries can also be helpful. These are, I'm referring to the family maintained registries, or databases where families can list a person's disabilities, their preferred approaches, whether they need personal space, whether they're triggered by things like lights and sirens. And these can be good, but there were some concerns, privacy concerns, of course. This is private information. Also, are families staying on top of these registries? And if they are, who maintains this information? Is it maintained at the state level? Is it maintained by each different agency? If that's the case, our families are then required to update this information in numerous different databases. And then lastly, do officers know to check? And even if they do they have the individual's name? So ultimately, it's most important to ensure that officers can identify IDDs, but registries can be helpful. Excuse me. The final resource that I will discuss with you here was the locative technology. So these are trackers, essentially. And this was discussed at length during the workshop, and ultimately the panel had a number of significant concerns about them. Chief among those was that some families can misinterpret locative devices as a panacea and thinking that they don't need to have other mechanisms in place to avoid tragedy, whether it's locks on doors or an emergency plan if an individual does wander. There were other concerns about the various technologies. Radio frequency, which is often used, has a very limited range, but it can find the individual if they're within a certain radius. GPS, of course, has a much wider range, but it requires signal, which can be tough to come across in the woods or near bodies of water. Families must ensure the daily functionality of these trackers. And importantly, it doesn't protect the individual while they're wandering. So if an individual is wearing a tracker, and they wander into a busy intersection, that device will not protect them. So ultimately, the panel thought that there were other resources that could be more beneficial in improving this response. The last key problem area that I'll talk to you about today is partnerships, and that they are critical for improving the police response. Throughout the entire workshop, underscoring every need that was discussed, was the significance of partnerships. Partnerships between law enforcement, medical professionals, advocacy organizations, and most importantly, those with lived experience. Again, this is something that the panel discussed throughout the entirety of the workshop. And they also noted the importance of not just these partnerships, but sharing the lessons learned from these partnerships far and wide, to make sure that this improvement can be widespread and not just siloed to a certain agency or region. And the first step, as I sort of have been touching on, is to, in all aspects, whether conducting research or developing training, it's imperative to incorporate interdisciplinary teams. Again, law enforcement, medical field, advocates, those with lived experience. And ideally, these partnerships can be formalized in interagency working groups at the state, federal, or even local level to coordinate efforts. It's also critical for law enforcement agencies to establish relationships with their local IDD community. And one way this can be done is through the community outreach and education events. Specifically regarding the outreach events, this was important to several of the panelists, or rather they experienced success with these because they believe that for law enforcement, it promotes awareness, acceptance, and compassion by presenting those with IDDs in an empathetic light. These two populations are allowed to meet in a dignified manner during non-crisis situations. At the same time, this positive experience with law enforcement may prevent the IDD community from associating the police with trouble or with crisis. Another way that agencies have, some agencies have helped in this area is hosting traffic stop simulations. they will, have a, say, parking lot for the afternoon where individuals can come and simulate a traffic stop so they can understand what it's like to be pulled over. And they also provide those that come with cards that they would keep maybe in their sun visor that they could hand to the officer along with their license and registration to indicate that they have a disability and any other relevant information. Ultimately, the goal for these events is to build relationships and increase familiarity. Now, the final need that I will discuss with you all this afternoon is the importance of disseminating knowledge. And I'll say it one last time, we know very little about the law enforcement response to those with IDDs. But there are a number of agencies who are doing a good job. One example was the Maryland County or the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland. They have a very robust autism and IDD unit where they invest a great deal, and they have partnered with a number of advocacy organizations. And it's important to know what agencies like that are doing. They've done a lot of the legwork in this space, and so by sharing the lessons learned far and wide, we can better improve. And another issue is research. We talked about data initially or up front, and a big part of the problem with research is that it's often locked behind paywall. So if, for example, the state of California is funding training evaluations or other research endeavors, it's important to require that, for example, a white paper is published that's accessible to all, or research posted or published in refereed journals is open access. Ultimately, we just want to avoid siloing our efforts and keeping the lessons learned locked behind that. The state post can help with this, can share findings. The state can can operate a repository or resource locator for training and practice materials. Ultimately, it is these partnerships and sharing the lessons learned from them that is going to help us move forward. So, moving forward, as Megan touched on earlier, the panel was tasked with identifying the sort of medium-term needs, what's important now and what's going to be important over the next 5 years, and that's what we talked about today. We need to first understand what we're up against. We need to understand what's being done and what's working and what's not, and then we need to develop guidance for law enforcement for the IDD community so that they understand how to best interact with one another. And of course, throughout it all, as we're addressing these needs, we need partnerships of all those involved, those closest to the issue, officers, lived experience, medical professionals. And this is how ultimately we can improve the law enforcement response to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The report contains all of this and more. And we are happy to answer some questions for you. But with that, we conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Any questions from the council of our panel? And let me see if I can. Because I can't see you at all one time, would you please just mention if you have a question of the panel? Well, then I do. So I wrote down a couple notes as you were presenting to us. In the beginning, you mentioned a lot of the experts and whatnot of the when you started up the process. Was anybody with IDD or from the IDD community part of that startup for input on the process?
And you're talking about the workshop itself today. Was there anyone that was at the workshop that was part of the discussion?
Yeah, who has IDD and the different kind of modes that are there?
Yeah, so there was no individuals who had IDD themselves, but there were a number on the panel that had lived experience, whether it was a child or a loved one or something to that effect.
Okay, I appreciate that. In the trainings and again, there's different modes of disabilities, obviously, and kind of complex. And it was brought to us earlier from Councilmember Burt about the interaction between a dual diagnosis with IDD and mental issues. One of the things, when you talk about technology coming on the forefront now and interaction, is there any talk about or thought process about using technology, say for a person who's hearing impaired, to be able to use like a social media or whatever to get an ASL interpreter to be part of that equation?
Yeah, so they didn't discuss any. They discussed some resources as we talked about locative technology, the databases. They didn't specifically discuss that sort of technology, primarily because their main concern is that we can't even answer some of the foundational questions. So they think it would be more important to identify, the number of contacts, how to train officers before we get into identifying those which sorts of technologies work. I certainly do not think they would be opposed to it. It's just specific technologies like that weren't discussed at length. It was sort of, as I noted, just we need to evaluate the resources that are being used. So if that includes those technologies, we need to have an evaluation of it to see what's the impact.
No, I appreciate that. And I don't think we can leave anything on the table at this point, right? With seeing the cause. And one of the things also, a lot of the IDD, not a lot, I want to rephrase that. Some members of the IDD community have been traumatized in other facets of their lives. And so when you think about that interaction, that initial interaction, was there any thought process about talking about how to maneuver about that if they're showing signs of instant hesitation or whatever, again, a previous issue or impact to the individuals, is ongoing or it can be ongoing. And how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, so this was touched on, and it was, again, part of, the training discussion. The most important aspect of that is for officers to be able to identify it and then effectively communicate with these individuals. And one of the advocacy organizations has a training exercise. I'm forgetting some of the details, but effectively an officer is, they have found a woman who was in a facility of sorts who wandered. And I believe that she had a history of sexual abuse. And one of the things that they challenge officers on is being mindful of that and asking the individual, for example, if they had been assaulted while they were out wandering, how was the encounter, or what was that experience like? Are they mindful of those sorts of that sort of trauma? So yes, they did touch on that. Yeah.
Okay. And one of the things you've talked about interaction in the community, I've seen in my experience with the school resource officers that interact with the special education classes in the school districts has been very, very, very helpful in beginning that relationship in the community. And seeing Officer Mitch somewhere else or whatever. And so that's one of the things I think that is highly beneficial with the as they grow up in the special education program and the interaction with the SRO. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen has been helpful.
Yeah, the discussion of the community outreach efforts and you'll see this in the report, but they talk about how these can humanize the issue and sort of, you know, break down the blue wall and allow officers to empathize or just better understand the experiences of these individuals. And so that, like I said, as you'll see in the report, it was something that they thought was important were these community outreach efforts.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Any questions of from the council of our, okay, I see Councilmember Burt.
I was gonna let somebody else go first. Thanks you, Chair, for the great questions. I appreciate it. Great information. Thank you so much. I was curious about the data. So data is something near and dear to our hearts, and also frustrated that, you know, there is not a data source. But one of the questions, well, two of the questions that we have is this self-reported data? So are we relying on a family member or a person at a residence who's calling for assistance to say, I have a loved one with autism, for instance, and they need help? Is that how you are looking at the data, or are you relying on officers' observations, which is really tough, and I don't expect them to diagnose, but I'm just curious where you're thinking this data is coming from?
Yeah, so just to be clear, for our work, we didn't look at any of the data. When the experts talked about data, they just talked about how it can't tell us a lot. And part of that was because it relies heavily on self-report data. So it could be significantly underreported. And so there was discussion about what information do you collect? And of course, as researchers here at PERF, we always want more data. We want better data. But it's hard. It's hard to collect good data with any sort of regularity. And officers are already asked to do a ton. And so one of the things they talked about is how do we get, for example, an idea of the prevalence of IDD contacts for this jurisdiction. And there was no definitive agreement. You know, like I said, if we were to talk about what variables to collect and how to collect them, that could have been a workshop in and of itself. But ultimately, there was some consensus on ultimately what you ask officers to collect is it has to be it has to be a minimum burden. So they suggested maybe a checkbox in the report where the officer suspects that it was IDD related or not, just to get some of this base level data. And the reason being is if you're asking them to fill out a text box or something with detailed information for every case, officers they'll find ways around it. They'll say that they don't suggest, or they don't, they didn't suspect it or whatever, because they're asked to do a lot, and report writing can be a real pain. So they had talked about just asking for minimum data because it can be, if you ask for too much, the resulting data is not going to be great. They also talked about a lot of this data is going to have to come from the medical profession or public health, right? Officers can only, whether the family tells law enforcement or an officer suspects an IDD, that's about as much as information as they can collect. So it's going to have to be in some way, the medical profession, public health department is going to have to get involved in helping with estimates. But there wasn't a ton of specifics on what exactly to collect and how to collect it. It was just, this is first and foremost what we're going to need.
Yeah, was there also any conversation around the co-occurring conditions, as the chair spoke about? So, we're finding, of course, that there's individuals with intellectual disabilities and who are bipolar and also deaf or hard of hearing, right? And that data is not collecting. And depending on what's going on, it may be the mental health component that the family's only calling regarding one issue, and not taking into consideration some of the other. So I was wondering if there's any conversation around how do you address when there's co-occurring conditions?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there was certainly discussion about the need for data on co-occurring disorders, how prevalent they are. There's certainly the training needs to account for the possibility of co-occurring disorders. Again, they didn't specify, how exactly that law enforcement would go about collecting that or what specifically needs collected. But the report does touch on the importance of at least knowing, what's the prevalence of these co-occurring disorders, or at least what's the extent to which officers encounter these sorts of situations, which goes back to the importance of teaching officers to identify. The panel doesn't believe that police should be expected to diagnose IDDs or mental health conditions, but to just be able to identify that this is in play. That I mentioned Montgomery County, Maryland, and as part of their officer training, one of the things that they teach is think autism, not drugs. And that's obviously a bit of a shorthand for it, but just teaching individuals or teaching officers, when you encounter individuals that may be acting atypically, perhaps it is autism or something else, and not, substance use.
I just wanted to piggyback on Dustin. I thought this was a really interesting part of the conversation at the workshop, and that it really informs what you want to do about training, because like Dustin was making the point earlier, you can't really train officers to know how subtle ways to respond to all of the different varieties of IDDs that are out there. Autism is different than Fragile X, is different than anything else. And then you layer in possible drug use or mental health issues on top of that. So part of the argument was that we can't expect officers to arrive on the scene and immediately know exactly what the challenges are. So training more for what are the symptoms, what are you seeing on the scene, how to just respond to someone who maybe isn't verbal or maybe is hesitating, like Dustin was saying, like think autism, think about the different things that might be going on. So you don't necessarily need to do the diagnosis, but you just need to be able to respond to whatever you're faced with in that moment. Well, you need to be able to do that well and not just have kind of one way of thinking about it. So it sort of is like finding a middle ground between training officers to be able to handle every single potential, situation they might come up against, and giving them enough tools so that they can handle the largest range of situations in the best possible way.
I appreciate that. And I will say, just to editorialize a little bit, is that we feel that we also have a responsibility to help families know what data that they need to give to first responders quickly. And when they do have a long list of comorbid conditions, having that conversation and appreciate everybody on this call of how do we get that information quickly and succinctly to a first responder so that they can make decisions based on the best information at the time. So also, leaving families out, that we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and each other on how to help first responders help us. Thanks.
Any other questions from the council of the presenter? I see Mr. Phillips.
To me, I like to help out people, make sure their safety out there. The police don't care. And I care about families, and churches, and things like that. For myself, I don't make sure I'm gonna make a difference. Don't bring guns here in San Francisco. We need to come together. We didn't do that stuff here. We had to come together as a group and come together like ladies, guys, men. We have to work together as a team. We all as a team come together. And communities, we need to change. No guns allowed in San Francisco. None of that. We need to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the outreach events that we talked about, so to backtrack a bit, part of what's so refreshing about being at PERF is you get to work with some of the most progressive and compassionate officers in all of law enforcement. And so these individuals are doing a lot of great things. And part of that, again, is just coming together, mutual understanding. And that, like I said, the partnerships underlied everything. And specifically training, you know, they talked at length about having individuals with lived experience deliver some of the training. One of the organizations on the panel, they employ those who have IDDs to help deliver this training. And so the emphasis throughout the entire workshop, and you'll see it when you reread the report, if you haven't already, is that the two sides, but all of those involved must come together and have a mutual understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Any other questions of the council? I'm looking. Let's see other hands up. One other question has been mentioned earlier today, was also the involvement of 911 dispatch as a first interaction also with the police department or the officer. Was there any discussions about that process being integrated?
Yes, absolutely. You know, when laying out this PowerPoint, there are 23 needs. I can't get into every single need, and so sort of had to find themes where you could. But something that was discussed, particularly with regard to training and resources, is the inclusion of dispatch. Like Megan said, we had I believe she's the head of dispatch out there in Arlington, Virginia, and she was represented on the panel and discussed how oftentimes with law enforcement training, dispatchers receive none of it, or they have that resources aren't developed for them as well. And as we all know, many police citizen encounters begin, they call, to dispatch. And so they talked about the importance of ensuring that these training and resources, maybe there's not entirely separate training and resources for these professionals, but that they are included in these trainings and they receive these resources. Just because, you know, a lot of times in hindsight, you can listen to a call and realize, hey, the dispatcher could have identified or it was clear on the call that this was at play or that was at play. So yeah, absolutely. And that is in the report, the discussion of including dispatch.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Anybody have any additional thoughts or questions? Well, I don't see any. Would you like to kind of close?
Yeah, I think that's okay with us. So, you know, we appreciate you all or having us come out and speak with you about our recent report. I think that if the council is interested in contacting any one of these individuals who are listed, it's one of the first pages. I think each and every one of them would be happy to support in any way they can. Like I said, many of them do have lived experience, and so it's an area that they're passionate about. And so again, thank you all for this opportunity. And if you have any questions, do feel free to shoot me an email and we'll get back to you.
Well, thank you so much. You've been amazing, both of you, and thank you for the opportunity and taking the time to share with us your work. And, you know, it doesn't go unnoticed. It's really, you know, a desperate need throughout the country, and we appreciate you doing that. And look forward to possibly engaging again as we go forward with questions and thoughts from you. So both of you, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Yep.
Thank you all.
So with that, we're running a little ahead of time. I'm going to ask staff if they would like to use a filler to get us to 12:05, or would we like to go ahead and adjourn to lunch now? And I know I have something just before 1, so I need to be a hard and fast start at 1. I can't be before that. So would you like to do a filler or just go ahead and create the adjournment for lunch now?
Thank you, Chair Fraser. My recommendation is that we adjourn for lunch now unless any of the council members have a different thought.
Any council members would like to have any input on the adjournment now and then reconvene at 1? Everybody's in okay, well, we're looking like we're unanimous again. So we'll see you back at 1. Have a great lunch. And again, thank you so much. We're adjourned.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. Just gonna step away for 1 second.
Welcome back from lunch, everybody. I just want to check in with staff to see we're all in line and everything's on. Everybody's back from staff. So we can proceed.
I think we're ready in the room. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's move forward with Madam Parliamentarian. Would you please take roll?
Okay, thank you very much. I will begin calling roll with Chair Fraser.
Present.
Chair Fraser is present. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Present.
Vice Chair Zuniga is present. Member Brazil.
Present.
Member Brazil is present. Member Brown.
Here.
Member Brown is present. Member Burt.
Present.
Member Burt is present. Member Libero.
Present.
Member Libero is present. Member Petarudu. Member Petarudu is absent. Member Phillips.
Present.
Member Phillips is present. And Member Tingarides. Member Tingarides is absent. Mr. Chairman, there are 9 members on the advisory council, and the number required for a quorum is 5. The number present is 7. A quorum has been reestablished.
So we do have a quorum established at 7. We will move forward on the item number 9 on the agenda. Presentation discussion item. The presentation on improving interactions between law enforcement and individuals with autism. We have our panelist, Michael Bernick. He's counsel with Dwayne Morris LLP. and former director of the California Employment Development Department, and Camila Bixler, co-chair of the board of directors of Ascend. So here we are. I saw Michael there a second ago.
Here, Jim.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for both of you to take this time and join us. I look forward to your presentation, and please, at your discretion. I don't know if Ben had an introduction as the first panel, and if not, would you like to introduce yourselves and please share with us your story?
Yeah, no, Jim, I appreciate this and look forward to it. Ola and I served together on the California Policy Center for IDD. So that's how I was connected to this. And as you say, I was a state employee myself at EDD, and have been in the autism field for now 32 years. I have a son who's 35 and autism. But what we want to focus on today, and Camila Bixler, our Ascend co-chair, will do much of it, is on the issue of public safety, and which is a big issue in our Ascend group. Ascend is a volunteer group here in the Bay Area, or really Northern California, of adults on the spectrum, family members and advocates. So it's a combined group. And again, we differ from other autism groups in terms of really the focus on adults and how to build structures, employment, housing, mental health, public safety, to better integrate our community into the general community. And as I say, public safety is one of our main issues. Just real quickly on Ascend, we're all volunteer, and it's actually one of the oldest adult autism groups in the United States, as well as one of the largest. We have a mailing list of about 800. We work with other groups. We work with Beth and her group on issues of public safety. And we just had, in fact, last month, Jim, our 25th anniversary celebration. In terms of projects, you want to go on to the next slide? That's who we are. Let's move on. In terms of our activities, as I mentioned, we range. Employment, as you might imagine, is a main issue for us. We have a job club. For our members, employment is really somewhere to go every day. I don't need to tell you, somewhere to go every day, some structure in their lives, very important. So we have a job club, we have a TV show, Life on the Autism Spectrum, and we have monthly meetings of speakers. Why don't we go on? Next slide. Camila, why don't I turn it over to you now? And let's focus specifically, Jim, what we want to talk about is specifically the activities we've been doing with the SF Police Department. What have been the results so far? What has worked most effectively? And for that, let me turn it over to our co-chair, Camila Bixler.
Hi, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to talk about our work with SFPD. We started in about 2016, and the motivation was basically I'm a parent of an adult on the autism spectrum, and I was really fearful for my son out there in the community. And so as I was talking to other Ascend members, it became clear to me that it wasn't just my son who'd had some difficulties, that a number of our people had experiences with law enforcement. Okay, whoops. Let me go back. Okay, and with my son particularly, he had these very dramatic meltdowns at school when he was young, and my husband and I were very fearful of what that would mean for him in the adult world. They dissipated, and I thought, well, okay, now we're home free. But what I didn't realize is when people become adults and they're atypical, that it's a real significant risk factor for interaction with law enforcement. My son has spatial difficulties and he bumps into people and he sits too close on the bus. And, you know, if I mention it to him, he'll say, how can I do direction and space at the same time? So he's really dealing with challenges that people can't see. Okay, so our members also reported that they've been victims of crimes, they've been victims of public misunderstanding that have been reported to the police, and they've been victims of police misunderstanding. One of our members, a woman in her 30s, unknown man approached her, you know, rang her doorbell and asked her for a glass of water. Could I have a glass of water? And she said, why, sure. And of course, the next thing he pushed his way in and was sexually assaulting her. Another one of our members was waiting at the bus stop and somebody came up and said, could you help me? And he said, sure. And he helped them cash a check for $5,000, which turned out to be fraudulent, and he was out the $5,000. In cases of our members, they can't report the crimes on their own. So this is an area where we really have to support our community in being able to report crimes, giving them support for being the victim and then being able to report the crime itself. The public also doesn't understand. One of our members was waiting for the bus and looking in car windows to pass the time. Well, of course, someone reported that as casing the cars, and the police came and were not terribly sympathetic. Again, as I mentioned before, standing too close to people, bumping into them, stepping on toes, all of that is a potential flashpoint for trouble. And one of our members was thrown out of a bookstore and the police were called because he was on something. Well, what he was on was autism, but the bookstore people didn't recognize it and treated him pretty harshly. Okay, and then the police themselves don't know what they're looking at. One of our members was grabbed by a TSA agent at the airport because he wasn't making eye contact and seemed kind of out of it, and was thrown into a plexiglass box and held there until it could be sorted out. So it was a pretty unpleasant encounter for that person. So we have anecdotal experiences in Ascend, and I think it is pretty much aligns with national research on police interaction. So we decided, okay, we have to educate ourselves. We have to protect ourselves. And so we shared our experiences in a meeting. We watched Emily Island's movie, Be Safe, the movie. We did role play. We talked about the possibility of having autism identification cards, carrying them, but that has a problem of someone trying to reach for a card when police would interpret that as, you know, reaching for a weapon. And some people really didn't like the idea of disclosure. We did recommend that people have support person information cards in their wallet, so in case they are needed. But what we did is we invited the San Francisco Police Department to come and be part of this meeting. So, and I might point out, I think it was Mike that gave us the police commission contact to get the police department's attention, because they're very hierarchical. And if you try to approach from the bottom, it's very difficult to get their attention. But if you approach from the top, it's much, much easier. So Commander Mosier came. He was great. He watched the movie with us. He gave us advice for interacting with the police. He pointed out that the greatest problem for people with autism is their inability to respond quickly to commands. And so when we do autism training with CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, we stress this idea of command, compliance, wait, command, compliance, wait, rather than command, 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 and people can't keep up and they can't do it. So Commander Mosier said, okay, here are these people trying to educate themselves. And we approached him as saying, we need the police to keep us safe. And so he said, well, why don't we make an autism training video? Okay, and let's see. Okay, so there's high interest in collaboration in the video. There are a lot of officers who have family members with autism. And this was a video that was very, we worked on ourselves. Our members wrote parts of it. We collaborated with the police, but we were very involved. And we took the theme of misinterpretation, how easily the autism traits are misinterpreted by both the public and the police. And we used a variety of people, variety of our members speaking for themselves. And I think that's a key to training, is having people really speak for themselves and not just talk about them. We'll see too, we're not going to watch the whole video, but we'll watch a little news film clip of it from KTVU. But the two officers involved both had daughters on the autism spectrum, so they were very interested in what we were doing. And through that, we became involved with CIT.
Major conference on autism in San Francisco will recognize the city's police department for making a groundbreaking training video for officers on how to recognize and deal with people living with autism. New at 5 tonight, KTVU's Tom Bakar joins us now with why this training video may save lives. Tom.
And we're talking about 720,000 people in California alone that have autism. Next month, the San Francisco Police Department will start training all officers how to avoid or reduce conflicts with those folks who have autism. It took a year for the San Francisco police and autism activists to create this training video.
In making this video, we were hoping to give our officers an extra tool in which to recognize some of the traits of individuals who are on the autism spectrum.
Camilla Bixler is an autism activist and a mother of a son with autism.
A lot of autistic traits are pretty easily misunderstood. We felt that there was need for some kind of collaboration and need to really train officers.
This can reduce unnecessary arrests and violent confrontations. And though the tape has experts, law enforcement officers, and even a dramatization, it presents something far, far more important.
Perhaps the most unique aspect of this video is people on the spectrum talking about themselves.
My name is Joshua Schwartz. I'm on the autism spectrum. It's hard for me to make eye contact. That doesn't mean I'm being dishonest or trying to lie.
I am very sensitive to touch. It can be very painful, so I might pull away. I'm not fighting or resisting.
I like shiny objects. I like the reflection of people's glasses, but I'm not trying to invade their safety zone.
People often point out to me that I'm not making eye contact. That's just how I normally conduct myself.
Sometimes people on the spectrum laugh at unusual times. They just do it. I don't know why. They're not mocking anyone.
In their own words.
I believe that that's probably one of the most powerful pieces of the video, is actually seeing traits and hearing members from the autism community speak about the traits.
That video training begins next month for all current SFPD officers and every new one thereafter. Tom Bakar, KTVU Fox 2 News.
Okay, so that by working on that video and working in collaboration with the police, we joined the Crisis Intervention Team Community Stakeholders Work Group. And I've been a member of that group. We've had access to the police department since 2017. We did this work at 2016, and then in 2017. I might point out that at one of our conferences, we gave an award to the police department. They were very pleased with the award. They were very pleased with the press coverage, and it's made them really be our friends, which is what we want. I probably don't need to tell this committee about CIT, the national movement. Time, distance, and de-escalation is the heart of it versus the traditional command and control. And command and control is just such a problem for our community. Sirens, lights, shouted commands all make it very difficult for people to respond. Okay, so who's in this stakeholders group that meets monthly? We have law enforcement, Office of Police Accountability, district attorney, all sorts of members who are responding to people with behavioral health differences, community members, and the monthly meetings are useful. And then the group meets quarterly with Police Chief William Scott, and that is a real point of access for the community to the Chief of Police. And so I really think that that speaks well for San Francisco CIT to have that point of access. And what do we do with the stakeholders group? We review data on a monthly basis. There's a dashboard, and we look at the number and kind of behavioral health calls, use of force, injuries, ethnicity, gender, age, and there has been talk of adding IDD and autism data to the dashboard. Okay, Ascend has participated in the CIT training for the officers. So did a presentation on IDD and autism. Again, this command compliance command was stressed. And it was very interesting. We had a panel of autistic adults that was very well received by the officers. I had given a presentation, and I have many years experience as a classroom teacher. And I could see that the officers were polite and they were listening, but they were kind of laid back in their chairs and probably thinking, I wonder what this older woman knows about policing and why is she telling me how to do my job? But none of that was said, of course. But when the panel of Spectrum adults came up to the front, everything changed. They leaned forward in their seats. They wanted to see who these people were. They were so attentive. It was right before lunchtime, and I thought, oh no, we're going to lose them at 12. Not one person in that room looked at their watch or their phone to check the time. So I think the importance of this interpersonal connection and this person-to-person contact can't be overstressed. Okay, we did that one. Okay, San Francisco CIT was established in 2011, I think, with a DOJ order. I think that San Francisco CIT is really a leader because of the caliber of their training. They have 40 hours of classroom instruction plus 10 hours of tactical training. And then there's this robust data collection. But I think the tactical training, the classroom instruction is important. And they have, a lot of different speakers and high caliber speakers. But the 10 hours of tactical training really show officers how to do things and give them the tools to be out there and to feel that they're safe. Because if you just give them theoretical training, it doesn't, it's not enough. So they have to have this tactical training. I've never seen the tactical training because you have to be in law enforcement to be able to attend it, but they speak very highly of it. And it uses teamwork, a command person, when there's a happening incident, and less lethal weapons. And anyway, it's very interesting, and it causes a lot of buy-in. Officers are not required to take CIT training. So I think this voluntary aspect of it is quite interesting psychologically. Right now, there are about 1,200 officers that have been trained in San Francisco, or the number may be a little higher. But anyway, the goal is to get the whole force trained. Refresher course is being planned, and robust data, and the data shows that there's a downward trend in the use of force in behavioral health calls. So that's all very encouraging. And people who have been with the police force report back that the culture has really changed, and that this training has been part of that culture change. So if people talk about defund the police, the problem is the police need more training, not less. So they can't have their budgets slashed to do away with training. Okay, another interaction that we had with the police department is the ARC dance. And every month the ARC has a dance on Friday night, one Friday night a month. And the cadets from the police academy came in their little cadet uniforms, and they had pizza, and they listened to a presentation on IDD and autism. They got tips for interacting with the community. There was a Q&A, and then the cadets joined the dance, and they all danced together for about an hour. And it was really a wonderful thing to see. At first, it was a little awkward, but pretty soon everybody got into it, and it was a wonderful experience for both sides. So all these different ways of face-to-face interaction are really, I think, important. Okay, so I don't know. One of the things that's happening with crisis response in San Francisco, and I think this could help our community, is that CIT and the Department of Public Health are working together on some calls. So clinician, if requested, can go out with the CIT team in responding to a mental health call. Now we also have Street Crisis Response, Department of Public Health, and the Fire Department are all responding to nonviolent mental health calls. So this reduces the possibility of use of force. And then I was on the curriculum committee, and we looked at a new training tool that might be of interest, the virtual reality training tool that it showed autistic individuals how to interact with law enforcement, and it showed law enforcement how to better respond to calls for service. And this is developed by Axon, the maker of tasers, ironically enough. Okay, so it's a confusing and difficult time for law enforcement. It continues to be. We have a lot of guns. We need more CIT training. Worried about budgeting. And the issue right now, San Francisco is understaffed. Police department is understaffed. And fewer police officers make those core principles of time, distance, and de-escalation just simply harder to adhere to. Okay, so I don't need to go over all of the calling 911 for someone in crisis, but it's part of my idea that we as parents and members of the autism community have to be prepared to do our part. It's a two-way street. We have to prepare ourselves for interacting with the police. We have to prepare all of our community members so they can interact safely. Okay, and then one idea, and I don't see it happening right now, but there was initially talk of Smart 911, and that's kind of an interesting concept. It's a national data service. It's voluntary. You don't have to be in it, but you can have your information displayed, and with a registered address. And if the first responders are going to that address, they already know that somebody with autism lives there, and they're more ready to respond to that. So the program they've told us that the program takes a lot of screen real estate, so that the dispatchers would all have to have new monitors. And then there's the idea of somebody may be able to access the information, so there would be needs for encryption. So anyway, it has some barriers, but it's an interesting concept. Okay, so here are my conclusions. The potential for misunderstanding remains high. I think the danger to our community remains high. We need to have ongoing education for ourselves and for law enforcement. It has to be a two-way street. And I was thinking it may even be appropriate for IEP goals or IPP goals, so that people have a little bit of training on how to respond, how to identify themselves, and how to protect themselves, really. And we need initiatives on all levels, national guidance, the state, as you're doing here, local initiatives. Policing is very local. You need to make those contacts locally. And one of the other things I was just going to point out is that there's a lot of change within the police department. They have continual rounds of retirements and promotions and other assignments. So there's no one and done. You can't go in and just train them and then they're all trained. It has to be ongoing, and any kind of ongoing relationship is very, very helpful. And then again, as I've stressed, in-person interaction with law enforcement is mutually beneficial for both sides. Okay, thanks.
And that's our proposal. That's our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions of our panelists from the council? And if I don't see, Councilmember Burt.
Are you surprised? Great presentation, and I love your video. I was just curious how long that video was. And from someone who's tried to shoot a video, I just again want to compliment you on the quality and the substance that was in that video. So thank you for all your work.
Yeah, I think the training video was about 20 minutes. And the police department provided a professional videographer, their videographer, to do the video. And they retained control of the video, and they haven't put it out for distribution. But and they also included some things that I may or may not have included in the video if it had all been my choice. But it was a collaboration. We worked together.
And I would say, Jim, you know, Ascend, we've worked with Beth and the Autism Society down there on an issue that came up concerning a shooting. Remember that, Beth? The Costco shooting. So, you know, we look forward to working with there's a whole network, as you might imagine, of us.
Yeah, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I like the video. Make sure two kids and families come together for the streets who can't be by themselves. Make sure there's safety out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to say this idea of being safe. And this was an area where we were able to really talk to the police and say, you know, we need you to keep us safe. And then we were able to continue our conversation, but not, you know, so we asked them to help us stay safe.
Perfect. Any other questions? I'm searching up and down of our council.
I have a couple questions.
Please.
My first question is about the individuals or the self-advocates that were the video actors or in the interviews or panelists for the trainings. Could you speak to how they were recruited for that? And were they volunteers or were they paid? How did that work?
Yeah, nobody was paid. So the people for the now wait a minute, maybe for the training, maybe, I can't remember now exactly, but it could be that our organization said, we'll pay you $50 or $100 or something for your time. And we supported that. I think we did that. We often do that when we ask panelists to come and spend a large part of their day. But we asked for volunteers in our organization. And I'm sure we could have gotten volunteers. I can't remember if we paid them or not. But for the video, we had lots of people who wanted to participate. And so we just let everybody participate and we let the videographer edit. And everybody was quite happy to be the people that wanted to be included were very happy to be included. There was no concern about disclosure.
And then for the ARC dance you mentioned where the cadets were invited, was that required or was there any incentive for them to go, or was it more they were volunteering to participate?
I don't know about that, but my hunch is that that was just given as a part of the program that day because there was, you know, complete turnout. But I didn't notice, you know, I sat in on it and I didn't notice any negativity or eye rolling or bad body language or anything, you know, people seemed happy to be there.
So do we have any other questions from the council to the panelists? Well, I'll thank you. Go ahead.
I said, Jim, we appreciate this.
Oh, absolutely. You don't know how much this means to us, you guys stepping up and being part of this. And this, this is a statewide effort. So we're looking for, impactful recommendations and people that are in the mix and stakeholders. So it's really phenomenal that you both could take the time to share with us and mentor us, And so, and it's also good to see Julie Hayner. I built her house in the Dyewood Country Club. So, another life. So, brought back good memories. So anyway, yeah, no. So thank you so much. Keep in touch. How we can interact with each other, please, and how we can be helpful. Also, works both ways, right?
Good. We'll look forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye. So with that, we're ahead of time, and I'm going to ask staff's guidance. And I don't know if this is a hard and fast for the 2:10 for the public comment that we need to be on point for that.
Yes.
Because it is advertised.
Yes.
So what I thought, we are about 30 minutes fast. So would you like to recommend a agenda item to move forward? Or
Setting the meeting.
Yeah, so I think the remaining agenda item is agenda item 15 of setting of the next meeting. So perhaps we could do that, take a break, reconvene at 2:10 to have any public comment.
so would you like to do that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's move to agenda item 15. Discussion and an action item, setting the next council meeting date or dates, tentatively April 1st and 2nd, 2025, and agenda, or alternatively, delegating authority to DOJ to set meeting dates and agenda subject to approval by the chair and the vice chair. Staff have any kind of input to begin with?
There's a hand up, Jim.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Brown has her hand up.
Councilmember Brown, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. This past practice, hasn't the DOJ been setting up the future meetings via surveys? We want to continue that way?
They put it out there, surveys with, as our availability. I think they've targeted these 2 dates now to see how we look in the future. And I think they're basically asking us to look at our calendars and go there. And if we have any conflicts, that we can kind of adjust, or they can get back to us with some alternatives. So I know I have something on the first.
Is this on? Okay. I think my screen is not on, so I'm not sure you can see me. This is Kelly Burns from DOJ. Yeah, this is the usual item that we have at the end, where we do, as you all know, we did reach out to you for availability for the next meeting. The best availability for folks was April 1st and 2nd. But what we've done in the past is just have you give us a delegation of authority in order to confirm that meeting and to make a draft agenda and work in consultation with the chair and vice chair to make the agenda for the April meeting. So I think we would just need, Doretha can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we just need a motion to do exactly that and for you to discuss and vote.
I do see Mr. Brazil's hand up.
I was going to move, we delegate authority to DOJ to set the meeting agenda.
Appreciate that. I will say that this just came out April 1st and 2nd is my organization's policy summit at the Capitol, and our advocacy day is on the 2nd. And so it just was announced. I mean, I don't want to upset the apple cart for anybody. I know we have a very, very talented vice chair who can step right up and no problem. But it was announced and I have to be there. So I just pulled it up. So, which there is 8 others.
I will second the motion to allow the DOJ to move forward with setting the agenda and scheduling it.
So we have a first on DOJ setting the agenda scheduling, and I have first and a second. Madam Parliamentarian, would you please take the roll?
Thank you. Just to be clear, the motion was made by Member Brazil, is that correct?
That is correct, and seconded by Member Vice Chair Zuniga.
Thank you. I will begin the roll call with the chair. Chair Fraser.
Aye.
Chair Fraser votes aye. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Aye.
Vice Chair Zuniga votes aye. Member Brazil.
Aye.
Member Brazil votes aye. Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Brown votes aye. Member Burt.
Aye.
Member Burt votes aye. Member Libero.
Aye.
Member Libero votes aye. Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Phillips votes aye. And that. Mr. Chairman, there are 7 members present and voting. Did I miss someone? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Member Tingarides.
I'm aye.
Thank you. Member Tingarides votes aye. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays. The motion passes.
Motion passes on the DOJ's formulating the agenda and scheduling dates. So that leaves us back to item 10, which is about 20 minutes scheduled. So would staff recommend taking a break so that we are on point for public comment?
Yes, I think we have to have public comment at 2:10. So if we can take a break until then, and then I think that's the last item on the agenda besides the chair's closing.
Okay, so we're in adjournment until 2:10. See you then. Thank you. Welcome back. Go ahead and see how we're doing as far as folks that are we have a couple folks still. There we go, Astrid. Madam Parliamentarian, would you please take the roll for a quorum?
Yes, I will.
Give us 1 second here.
Call the roll.
Just 1 moment. Okay.
Be done by 3 o'clock. I'm taking a nap.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll begin with, excuse me, Chair Fraser.
Present.
Chair Fraser is present. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Present.
Vice Chair Zuniga is present. Member Brazil.
Present.
Member Brazil is present. Member Brown.
Present.
Member Brown is present. Member Burt.
Present.
Member Burt is present. Member Libero.
Present.
Member Libero is present. Member Petarudo? Member Petarudo is absent. Member Phillips?
Good.
Member Phillips is present. Member Tingarides?
Present.
Member Tingarides is present. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, there are 9 members on the council, and a minimum of 5 are required for a quorum. The number present is 8. A quorum has been reestablished.
Thank you, Madam Parliamentarian. We have a quorum as established by a roll call vote. And now we'll move on to item number 10, public comment. Time for the members of the public to contact through our link to be able to address the council on suggestions or recommendations, or just have a nice conversation. Are there any members of the public in the queue from staff?
Yeah, I'll give a little introduction to explain the process. Good afternoon, SB 882 Advisory Council members and members of the public. My name is Kelly Burns. I'm a Deputy Attorney General with the Department of Justice. The legislators SB 882 Advisory Council would like to hear from you. Today's public comment period will be for 20 minutes, and each person will have 3 minutes to speak. Please be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting, and the Advisory Council encourages you to participate. In addition to or in lieu of making comments today, you may also submit written comments at any time via email at sb882@doj.ca.gov. And we will start with Teresa Anderson.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, thank you all so much. Members, really appreciate you all so much for your time and dedication to this issue. I have a couple comments and a couple thoughts from today's meeting. First, this was a great meeting. I think all the presentations were very informative and very helpful in understanding different perspectives. I want to call out one of the comments made by Councilmember Burt and how much I appreciated it, because the comment she made about being collaborative and really bringing everyone to the table and, not finger pointing, getting down to some of the real issues in a meaningful way was really meaningful for me, because I was really fortunate to be part of the team that worked so hard to pass SB 882 and bring together everyone with that truly the collaborative intent in the original group that we worked with. And Madam Vice Chair will remember that well, because her organization was also a co-sponsor of that bill. And that was the intention, was to really stop, blaming and shaming and finger pointing and all that kind of stuff, and bring people together in a way that we could say, how do we actually make improvements? I think the data issue is huge. And I think that's one thing that, I'm really hopeful for with this advisory council, that data is a big part of the recommendations in one form or another. I really love the idea that was put forth about training for the advisory council members. I think that's a great opportunity. You guys are all in a position of leadership right now, leading this council and, putting forth recommendations to the legislature. So having that information is just an incredible opportunity. And I also really appreciate the discussion on how to include technology, perhaps, training officers on how to use technology to facilitate communication. And we know these interactions can pop off in, seconds. Like, it could be extremely challenging. There's a lot going on in the moment. But how do we really work towards facilitating meaningful communication between the two parties? And Chair Fraser, you mentioned an example related to people who are deaf or hard of hearing. That's critical. And so we think about people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and then you layer in some other factors that maybe have disability or some other things going on. And that interaction, becomes even more tense. So thinking about how we can include the deaf community as well in understanding the needs for communication. And I think the Department of Developmental Services, their deaf specialist there, Lisa Gonzalez, she's a tremendous resource when it comes to this. And I would strongly encourage the council to maybe invite Lisa to talk about some of the things that she's worked on over the years, and very easy, I shouldn't say easy because none of this is easy, but ways that, you know, she had some great ideas when we were working on a project earlier this year of how there's organizations out there, there's services out there that you could FaceTime. You could, you know, if there's an interaction going on, you can FaceTime with different service providers. There's a couple out there to provide immediate, instant, real-time interpreting. And so I think, you know, thinking about the ways we can actually incorporate technology into some of the recommendations is great. And just again, really, really thank you all so much for your time and dedication. I appreciate the opportunity to give public comment. I guess I should have said where I'm from. Sorry. Teresa Anderson, Executive Director with the California Policy Center for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. My apologies for that. I was just very excited.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment? You can use the raise hand function on Zoom to let us know that you'd like to speak. Okay, I see Dr. Aguirre-Kolb. You're unmuted. You have 3 minutes. Oh, not quite yet. Hold on. Now you're unmuted.
Yes, I am Dr. Christina Aguirre-Kolb. I'm calling from Tri-Counties Regional Center, and I just wanted to reiterate a lot of what Ms. Anderson was talking about, which is that this presentation was very timely, very important, and very well presented. As the clinical director, I have been going to our crisis intervention teams, and a lot of what the presenter was talking about is very, very true. We need it to resonate with the police officers who are doing the work. And I'm just so excited you all are working on this. And we in Santa Barbara just yesterday met with the Santa Barbara Police Department about the Blue Envelope program. So this is just also very timely, and I'm really glad that there's a statewide work to make this occur. And I really hope that you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Vice Chair, all just really and the panel take into account everything that you've heard today, because it was so true, and it's a very good representation of the work we're trying to do to serve our individuals with developmental disabilities.
Thank you.
Yes,
Do we have
thank you.
Do we have any more members of the public in the queue?
No, not at this time.
Okay, my understanding is that we need to leave it open until the 2:30 mark. Is that correct?
Yes, we do. And I'll also note that we don't have anyone in person. 2:33. 2:33? Okay.
Okay. So why don't I share my closing comments prior to that, and that way, after public comment at 2:33, we can make a motion for adjournment. How's that? That work?
Yes, that's us.
Okay. So jumping out of order again, but as it's been said today and many, many times, and I think the premise of us stepping up and being in this position and taking it literally, as all of you have done, and shown your expertise and We are blessed by two experts in the police and law enforcement arena. So that is something that I'm looking forward to input from their policy area and expertise. Because like I said, with our former public speaker mentioned, Teresa Anderson, that no finger pointing. And I think it is imperative to be a collaborative effort that we try to accomplish this goal or better interactions. And, you know, opinions are everything, but data, good data in provides good data out and better outcomes. And so I think the training tools that we're looking at going forward are going to be very helpful in decision making and looking at it. But I also want to remind, I know I don't have to remind, but I just want to make sure that we are reaching out to other agencies other than police departments, the California Highway Patrol, who's the state police for the state, and also all of our sheriff's departments, which also have the rural aspects. And I think Councilmember Brazil had told us one time that the implementation will be much harder in the rural areas because of the lack of funds, lack of additional timing resources and all of that. So we need to take that in consideration, how we can make it better for the rural departments to be able to accomplish what we're hoping to accomplish. And so that being said, I'm open to any other dialogue and any suggestions today at this point in time, because we do have some time. And I just want to have an open forum of any thoughts or what we can get going forward since we're on the record and in public. Any thoughts from the council?
I'd like to echo Frazier. I think this has been extremely beneficial today. And just coming from my perspective currently as a law enforcement officer, one of the key takeaways from today is the training, but not only the training, but the tools that need to be utilized to ensure that it remains fresh and it's consistent and that it's ongoing. It was mentioned earlier about the turnover in, you know, training probationary officers versus training a field sergeant who may adjudicate a use of force. Do they have an understanding of, you know, the incident and the actions that the individual may have taken prior to that interaction with law enforcement? And so when we look at training, I think we have to maybe do it at two different levels. You know, your ground officers that are out there responding to these radio calls, but then from the leadership perspective, you know, as a supervisor, as a watch commander, as a captain, what is my understanding of this training so that I can better support it and uplift it and set expectations of my police officers. And so I think, you know, getting the training in a classroom with police officers is one thing, but also having that understanding as a command staff officer and above is another. So having two tracks to this, I think, would be extremely important.
Thank you. Well said. Any other council comments while we have a little bit of open mic time? We have about 8 minutes. So any thoughts from others? We don't get often a chance to after a meeting have this kind of opportunity.
Bert's hand is up.
Councilmember Burt.
I won't take the whole 8 minutes. I did want to echo what Teresa had said about having a deaf specialist. I think I would love to have that on a future agenda to hear from that community. I'd also be curious with the data dashboard, like what is exactly out there in California. We've heard from wonderful speakers today, and I'm curious if we've addressed that as a council of what data is out there. And then the third thing I had was the VR simulators and scenarios. And just from a I don't even want to say evidence-based practice or emerging practice. Are they effective? Because I'm starting to see that as well, and I would love to hear some experts talk about that. And just how much I appreciate all of you. The expertise and the passion on this council is so wonderful, and I'm so encouraged that we are going to make a difference. So thank you.
And you mentioned the dashboard. I think that'd be a wonderful tool for all police departments to have. So that might be a great opportunity to include. So, but anyway, thank you for those comments. Any other members like to, I know our vice chair is full of vitality and ready to jump in there with her words of wisdom.
I don't know about words of wisdom, but no, I don't want to sound like a broken record, and I echo everything that everyone has said. The thoughts from many of the presenters today were it triggers more questions, or it triggers more, oh, what ifs we did this and what if we did that. I do personally love the last presenter, Camille's response or hint to the Smart 911 technology that's been put out there. As a proponent of the Manny Alert Act, hence named after my son, and leaning into that, I think it is just another tool, right? As we talk about providing law enforcement more tools, so that, it's not a fix-all, but it's not going to help in those instances where they come into contact with individuals with disabilities or mental health disorders. But if you're making a 911 call in advance and you have that tool in your tool chest to assess the situation prior to even going into it, in some circumstances, it's very useful. And not sure if Camille and them knew, but it sounds like, Jim, you might know them, that there was a report done, a fiscal report in implementing that, and the training for dispatchers was included in that. And I think it's just another tool that we can explore in our recommendations to bring forward. So I'm excited that other people have heard about it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So we have about 4 minutes. We can take a pause for the 4 minutes, wait and see if anybody from the public wants to jump on the last part of the public session, and then we'll move on. So I'm just going to go on mute and wait the 4 minutes if you guys don't mind. Mr. Phillips, I see your hand up.
Yes, I want to say thank you for everything for commission today. And I love this to help everybody out and to make a difference, make a change, and come together.
You're amazing. Thank you.
All right, I can start reading my public comment closing statements for the last minute. We are near the end of our 20-minute limit for public comments. If you were not able to complete or provide a comment today, the Advisory Council invites you to attend future meetings listed on the SB 882 website at https://www.oag.ca.gov/SB882 or submit written comments to sb882@doj.ca.gov. I will now turn the meeting back over to the chair.
Thank you so much. And with that, I would entertain a motion, a first and a second, please, to adjourn our meeting.
This is Vice Chair Frazier. I mean, Dick Frazier. Zuniga. I vote to adjourn.
I think that was the first. Thank you very much. Entertain a second, please.
Councilmember Libero, second the motion.
Thank you so much. Madam, we have a motion to first and a second to adjourn this meeting. Madam Parliamentarian, would you please take the roll?
Well, and there's hearing no discussion, I will call for the roll. Excuse me. Chair Frazier.
Yeah, aye.
Okay, Chair Frazier votes aye. Vice Chair Zuniga.
Aye.
Vice Chair Zuniga votes aye. Member Brazil.
Aye.
Member Brazil votes aye. Member Brown.
Aye.
Member Brown votes aye. Member Burt.
Aye.
Member Burt votes aye. Member Libero.
Aye.
Member Libero votes aye. Member Phillips.
Aye.
Member Phillips votes aye. Member Tingarides.
Aye.
Member Tingarides votes aye. Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 members present and voting. There were 8 ayes and 0 nays.
Thank you, Madam Parliamentarian. Staff, thank you so much for a wonderful agenda today. You guys were amazing. We look forward to our next encounter. Everybody have a nice weekend. Enjoy. And thank you so much for all your work. Take care.
You.
Thank you. Bye.
Let the record reflect that the motion passed.
That too.